Rachel, this table is for family, so go find a spot outside. My cousin laughed as she physically pushed my plate away. A moment later, the waiter dropped a $3,300 bill directly in front of me. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, looked at the smug faces surrounding me, and calmly pushed the leather folder back. I had no idea that within minutes my family would be watching their carefully constructed high society illusion shatter into a million pieces. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever felt completely abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you. We were sitting on the sun-drenched patio of the most exclusive country club restaurant in Oak Bluffs on Martha's Vineyard. The ocean breeze carried the scent of expensive seafood and old money. For my mother Vivian, this annual summer trip was the ultimate status symbol. It was her chance to parade our family around the black elite of the East Coast, proving we belonged among the generational wealth and high society circles. But for me, it was just another masterclass in humiliation. I am 35 years old, and for my entire life I have been the designated punching bag of this family. My cousin Sydney adjusted her designer sunglasses and sneered at me across the pristine white tablecloth. She had just shoved my half-eaten salad toward the center of the table, making room for her oversized luxury handbag. "You really should not be sitting here, Rachel," Sydney said, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "The VIP section is for true elites. You are ruining the aesthetic for the foundation photos we need to take later. Go find a spot by the bar or something." I looked at my mother, expecting her to intervene. Instead, Vivian casually adjusted her pearl necklace and refused to meet my eyes. "Sydney is right, Rachel," my mother said, her tone dripping with absolute annoyance. "You showed up in that basic linen dress looking like you are about to clean the cabanas. Do not embarrass me in front of the board members today. We have an image to uphold." I sat there absorbing the familiar sting of their cruelty. I was used to this dynamic. My sister Maya was the golden child who married Preston, a wealthy white hedge fund executive. My parents treated Preston like royalty, parading his background and his supposed Wall Street success at every family gathering. They worshipped the ground he walked on because his presence validated their desperate need for high society approval. Meanwhile, I was the outcast. They thought I was a struggling freelancer barely scraping by on odd jobs because I refused to follow my father into corporate law. They had no idea what I really did for a living, and they never cared enough to ask. Preston leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. He flashed a condescending smirk that made my blood boil. "Come on, Vivian, let her stay." Preston chuckled, taking a slow sip of his drink. "She can make herself useful. Besides, her little virtual assistant gig should cover a few appetizers, right? It is good for her to learn how things operate in the real world. Maybe if she pays attention, she can upgrade from typing emails to actually running a proper business one day." Maya laughed, resting her hand on Preston's arm. "You are too generous, honey. Rachel probably had to max out her credit card just to buy the ferry ticket to get to the island. Do not pressure her to pay for things she clearly cannot afford." I stared at them, my hands resting quietly in my lap. I did not yell. I did not defend myself. Years of enduring their mockery had taught me that reacting emotionally only gave them the satisfaction they craved. They fed on my insecurity. They desperately needed me to be the failure of the family so they could feel superior about their own lives. But today was different. Today, I was not the scared, insecure girl they thought I was. Just then, the waiter approached our table holding a sleek black leather folder. He looked nervous, glancing between Preston and my mother before placing the folder directly in front of me. I opened it and saw the total. $3,300. They had ordered vintage champagne premium lobsters, imported caviar, and top-tier steaks. I had ordered 1 cup of black coffee and a small side salad. "What is this?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "Your contribution to the family," my mother snapped, leaning forward. "You have been living selfishly for years, contributing absolutely nothing to our legacy. You show up here uninvited. You ruin our lunch with your miserable energy. The least you can do is earn your keep. Pay the bill, Rachel. It is the only useful thing you can do today." Preston chuckled again, shaking his head. Do you need me to cover it, Rachel? I know your little freelance setup probably does not bring in much. I can handle it, and you can just wash our cars when we get back to Atlanta to pay me back. I am sure you are good at manual labor. The sheer audacity of his comment hung in the salty air. Sydney snickered behind her hand, and Maya looked at me with an expression of pure pity. They were all waiting for me to break. They expected me to cry, to beg, or to storm off in a humiliating fit of rage. They wanted a massive spectacle to prove their point. Instead, I closed the leather folder. I reached into my purse and pulled out a solid metal card. It was cold, heavy, and unmistakably powerful. An exclusive invitation-only black card reserved for individuals with net worths they could not even begin to comprehend. I placed it gently on top of the bill. The waiter stepped forward to take it. "Excuse me," I said, looking up at the waiter. "Please charge exactly $8.50 to this card. That covers my black coffee and my salad. As for the remaining $3,291.50, you can hand that bill to the gentleman drinking the bourbon. He is apparently a very successful hedge fund vice president. I am sure he can handle it." My mother slammed her hand on the table, causing the crystal glasses to rattle. "Rachel, how dare you?" she hissed, her face turning a deep shade of red. "Stop playing games and pay the bill right now. You are embarrassing us in front of the entire club. People are staring. Do you have any idea how hard we worked to get a table here?" I completely ignored her and kept my eyes on the waiter. The young man looked terrified, but as he glanced down at the solid metal card resting on the table, his eyes widened in absolute shock. He recognized the specific insignia engraved on the matte black surface. It was not just a credit card. It was a corporate ownership card. "I am sorry, Mom." The waiter stammered, his hands shaking slightly. "I did not realize. Please forgive me." Before my mother could yell again, the general manager of the country club rushed over to our table. He had been watching the interaction from across the patio, and the moment he saw the card, his entire demeanor changed. He practically shoved the young waiter aside and bowed deeply, a perfect 45-degree angle, right in front of me. "Right away, Madam CEO." The manager said, his voice loud and clear, carrying across the silent patio. "Please accept my deepest apologies for the confusion. Your coffee and salad are completely on the house today. It is an absolute honor to have you visiting the Oak Bluffs property. Would you like me to have security escort these other guests out if they are bothering you?" The silence that fell over our table was deafening. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the coastal air. Sydney dropped her designer sunglasses onto the table. Maya's mouth fell open. Preston choked on his bourbon, coughing violently as he stared at the manager. My mother looked like she was about to faint. "Madam CEO." She repeated the words, barely escaping her lips. "What are you talking about? She is just a virtual assistant." The manager looked at my mother with polite disdain. "Ma'am, you are speaking to the founder and chief executive officer of Elite Estate Tech. This club and the entire resort property you are sitting on are managed by her corporate portfolio. She essentially owns the ground you are standing on." I picked up my black card and slid it back into my purse. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my simple linen dress. I looked down at my family, their faces pale, their arrogant smirks completely wiped away. They looked so small, so incredibly pathetic in their desperate pursuit of a status I literally owned. "I will leave you all to settle your tab," I said, keeping my voice light and professional. "Oh, and Preston, make sure you leave a 20% tip. I pay my staff very well, and I do not tolerate cheap guests at my establishments." The heavy silence on the patio was violently broken by the scraping of my father's chair. Reginald stood up, his face a turbulent mixture of fury and desperate pride. He could not stand being emasculated, especially not by the daughter he had spent decades treating like an afterthought. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored linen suit and aggressively pulled out his gold credit card, slapping it down onto the white tablecloth right next to where my black card had been just moments before. "We do not need any charity from you, Rachel." Reginald barked, his baritone voice trying to reclaim the authority that had just evaporated into the salty ocean breeze. "And we certainly do not need comped meals at a country club." I am a senior partner at my firm. I will pay for my own family's lunch as I always have. He shoved the gold card toward the terrified young waiter. Run it, he commanded, and add $1,000 tip to prove exactly who belongs at Oak Bluffs. The waiter looked at the card, then up at me, clearly unsure of how to proceed given that I owned the establishment. I simply gave the young man a brief nod, giving him permission to process my father's payment. The waiter pulled a sleek portable card terminal from his apron, inserted my father's gold card, and typed in the astronomical amount. We all watched the small digital screen. It said processing. Then a harsh, undeniable beep cut through the ambient sound of clinking silverware and distant crashing waves. The screen flashed red. Declined. My father's jaw tightened. Run it again. He snapped, his voice dropping an octave. Your machine is obviously malfunctioning. Do you have any idea how much money passes through that account daily? The waiter visibly swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he processed the chip a second time. Another sharp beep. Declined. Insufficient funds. Insufficient. Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her chest as several women at the adjacent table turned their heads to watch the spectacle. My mother's entire identity was built on projecting flawless wealth, and the glaring red light on that card terminal was her absolute worst nightmare. Reginald, what is going on? She hissed, keeping her voice low but frantic. Call the bank, this is a ridiculous error. It is just a security hold, Reginald muttered, avoiding eye contact with anyone at the table as he snatched the useless piece of plastic back. I made a large transfer this morning for a new property acquisition. The bank must have flagged the card for unusual out-of-state activity. That was when Preston decided to swoop in. He leaned back in his chair, completely unbothered, chuckling softly as he watched my father squirm. Preston loved these moments. He thrived on playing the wealthy white savior for my family, reminding them constantly that his generational wealth was the true anchor of their elite status. He reached into his designer wallet and smoothly tossed his Black American Express card onto the table. It slid across the linen and stopped right in front of the waiter. Relax, Reginald, Preston said, flashing a blindingly white, perfectly veneered smile. I have got this. Let us not ruin the afternoon arguing with broken machines. Consider lunch a treat from me. He looked over at me, his eyes filled with condescending amusement. You can keep your free coffee, Rachel. We prefer to actually pay our way. It is a matter of class. I did not take the bait. I simply stood my ground, watching the waiter pick up Preston's card and head back inside toward the main management office. As we waited, the tension at the table mutated from embarrassment back to vicious hostility. My sister Maya, who had been sitting in stunned silence since my ownership of the club was revealed, finally found her voice. She could not stand that I was looking down at them. She needed to drag me back into the mud. You always have to ruin everything, do you not? Maya spat, standing up to face me. Her designer sundress rustled as she crossed her arms, glaring at me with absolute venom. You come here, you play these pathetic little power games, and for what? To make Mom and Dad look bad. After everything they sacrificed for you, sacrificed for me. I asked, my voice calm but laced with genuine curiosity. Please, Maya, enlighten me. What exactly did they sacrifice? Maya scoffed, looking around to make sure the neighboring tables could hear her performance. Do not play stupid, Rachel. Mom and Dad literally drained their life savings to pay off your massive student loans. They nearly went bankrupt, keeping you out of debt when you decided to study something completely useless instead of going to law school. They gave you a clean slate, and this is how you repay them. By showing up and trying to humiliate them. My mother immediately chimed in, playing the role of the martyred parent flawlessly. We never threw it in your face, Rachel, Vivian said, dabbing the corner of her eye with a cloth napkin. We did it because we love you. But your sister is right. Your behavior today is incredibly ungrateful. I looked at my mother, then at my sister, and let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound echoed across the patio, startling a flock of seagulls near the railing. I reached into my designer tote bag, unzipped the interior pocket, and pulled out a folded stack of bank statements. I had brought them to Martha's Vineyard specifically for the business meetings I had scheduled later that afternoon, but they served a much better purpose right now. I tossed the papers onto the center of the table. They landed right next to the empty bread basket. They did not pay a single dime of my student loans, Maya. I said, my voice carrying clear and absolute authority. I paid every single penny myself, working 80-hour weeks building my company from the ground up. Maya rolled her eyes. You are lying. Dad showed me the withdrawal receipts from the college trust fund. Oh, the money was withdrawn. I countered, leaning forward slightly, resting my hands on the back of my chair. But it did not go to the federal loan providers. Look at the highlighted line on the second page, Maya. That is a direct wire transfer from my college trust account to a luxury car dealership in Atlanta. They emptied my education fund to buy your very first Porsche 911 when you graduated. The one you crashed 3 months later. Maya froze. She looked down at the papers, her eyes scanning the highlighted bank routing numbers and the dealership name. The color completely drained from her face. She slowly turned her head to look at our father. Dad, Maya whispered, the confident venom completely gone from her voice. Is that true? You bought my car with Rachel's tuition money. Reginald suddenly looked very interested in his empty water glass. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, to spin another elaborate lie, but no words came out. The illusion of their noble sacrifice was dead, exposed in black and white ink for everyone to see. I watched them drown in their own shame, not feeling an ounce of pity. They had used that fake sacrifice to guilt-trip me for years, to demand absolute obedience while secretly funding Maya's lavish lifestyle with the money meant for my future. Before anyone could attempt to change the subject, the heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open. The young waiter was marching back toward our table, but he was not alone. The general manager was walking right beside him, and his face was completely devoid of the polite hospitality he had shown moments before. The manager approached Preston. He did not hand the black American Express card back. Instead, he was holding Preston's card delicately between a pair of silver serving tweezers, holding it out as if it were contaminated. Sir? The manager said, his voice dropping all pretense of country club discretion. The bank did not just decline this transaction, they flagged this specific card for severe financial fraud. I have been instructed by American Express Corporate Security to physically confiscate this card and immediately contact local authorities. Preston's smug, relaxed posture vanished instantly. He shot up from his chair, almost knocking it over backwards. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice cracking with sudden, raw panic. That is impossible. Hand me my card right now. I cannot do that, sir, the manager replied firmly, stepping back and slipping the card into his own breast pocket. The authorities have been notified of your location. I suggest you wait for them to arrive. The entire table descended into absolute chaos. Maya began hyperventilating, grabbing Preston's arm, demanding to know why his card was reported stolen. Vivian looked like she was actually going to pass out, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Reginald was shouting at the manager, demanding to speak to the club's legal counsel. I stood perfectly still amidst the screaming and the panic, thoroughly enjoying the masterpiece of destruction unfolding before me. I looked directly at my brother-in-law, who was now sweating profusely, his eyes darting toward the exit. A severe fraud alert. I asked, a wicked smirk playing on my lips. I made sure my voice cut cleanly through the noise of my panicking family. That is incredibly strange for a top-tier Wall Street hedge fund vice president. Do you not agree, Preston? The ride from the country club back to the marina was a suffocating vacuum of heavy silence. Nobody spoke a single word in the back of the hired luxury vehicle. Maya sat clutching her designer purse, her knuckles stark white against the pristine leather interior. Preston stared blankly out the tinted window, a visible sheen of cold sweat coating his pale forehead. My mother, Vivian, breathed in short, jagged gasps, as if the very air of Martha's Vineyard had suddenly turned violently toxic. My father, Reginald, simply glared at the back of the driver's head, his jaw clenched so tight I honestly thought his teeth might shatter under the intense pressure. I rode in a separate car, entirely unbothered by their collective panicked silence. When my driver pulled up to the bustling harbor, the sky was beginning to turn a bruised, beautiful shade of purple. The family was already marching down the wooden dock toward their rented mega yacht. It was a massive three-story floating palace named the Sovereign, an extravagant, expensive vessel they had leased for 2 weeks purely to host lavish cocktail parties and falsely impress Reginald's potential high-net-worth legal clients. I walked up the gangway right behind them, my flats clicking softly against the polished teakwood deck. The moment the heavy glass doors of the main saloon slid shut, sealing us inside the luxurious air-conditioned interior, the polite high society facade completely evaporated into thin air. Vivian spun around, her face contorted with a vicious, unhinged rage. Without a single second of hesitation, she raised her hand and swung wildly at my face, aiming a sharp, stinging slap directly at my right cheek. I did not even flinch. I simply reached up and caught her wrist in midair, my grip firm and absolutely unyielding. Her eyes widened in genuine shock as I slowly, forcefully pushed her trembling hand away. "Do not ever try to touch me again," I said, my voice low, smooth, and intensely dangerous. Vivienne yanked her arm back, stumbling slightly against a white, tufted leather sofa. "How dare you!" she screamed, her shrill voice echoing sharply off the mirrored ceiling of the yacht. "How dare you humiliate Preston in front of the club manager? You planned that entire vicious spectacle, Rachel. You deliberately set him up to look like a complete fool with your sketchy little tech company and your fake corporate credit cards. I do not know exactly who you are sleeping with, or what illegal offshore scams you are running to get your hands on that kind of money, but it means absolutely nothing to us. You are still a bitter, jealous little girl desperately trying to tear down a successful real man." Maya stepped forward, placing a highly protective, delicate hand on Preston's broad chest. He noticeably flinched at her touch, but quickly masked it with a stiff, awkward nod. "You are just completely desperate for attention, Rachel." Maya sneered, curling her lip. "You could not stand watching Preston treat us to a perfectly nice afternoon, so you had to invent some ridiculous fraudulent alert to ruin it all. It was obviously probably just a simple clerical error. A minor banking glitch that happens to high-net-worth individuals all the time, right, honey?" Preston swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. "Yes," he croaked out, his voice sounding unnaturally thin and weak. "Exactly. Just a standard routine security hold on international elite accounts. It will definitely be cleared up by early tomorrow morning." I stood confidently in the absolute center of the plush living room, slowly clapping my hands together 3 distinct times. The sound was incredibly sharp and entirely mocking. The level of deep delusion in this room is truly spectacular to witness. I said, walking calmly over to the sleek marble bar and pouring myself a tall glass of sparkling water. "You are all standing here blindly defending a grown man whose elite credit card was just publicly confiscated by strict federal mandate, and you are somehow trying to convince your own selves it is a simple banking glitch." Reginald finally stepped forcefully into the emotional fray, his chest puffed out in that familiar, highly intimidating posture he heavily relied on in the courtroom. He pointed a thick, angry finger directly at my face. "You listen to me right now, Rachel." He barked, his voice booming with forced aggressive authority. "We do not need your sketchy money, and we certainly do not need your arrogant attitude. You think flashing a heavy black card makes you inherently better than us. You think running some nameless tech startup puts you in our exclusive league? You have absolutely no idea what real generational wealth looks like. Preston is playing in a financial sandbox you could not even begin to accurately comprehend." Vivian crossed her arms, a highly triumphant, smug smirk, returning to her perfectly contoured face. "Tell her, Reginald. Tell her exactly why she means absolutely nothing to our actual bottom line." Reginald smiled, a cold, deeply calculating expression that made my stomach aggressively turn. "Preston just successfully secured a massive $10 million offshore investment for my failing firm," he announced proudly, stepping over and slapping Preston heavily on the back. "My legal practice has been drastically expanding, and Preston brilliantly utilized his elite global contacts to bring in massive foreign capital. 10 million solid dollars, Rachel. It is a completely private, untraceable equity injection that will rapidly elevate my firm to an elite international status. We are entirely untouchable." You foolishly thought you could embarrass us over a petty $3,000 lunch bill, while Preston is busy orchestrating 8-figure corporate mergers before breakfast. You are entirely completely out of your depth. I took a very slow, measured sip of my sparkling water, letting the icy, cool liquid soothe my dry throat. I looked directly into my father's deeply arrogant dark eyes. That is a truly fascinating bedtime story, Dad. I said, my voice completely devoid of any real emotion. But massive elite hedge funds do not just blindly hand over $10 million in private equity to a heavily struggling regional law firm without requiring extremely significant collateral. So please tell me, what exactly did you leverage to get Preston that massive initial seed money to fully open the door for this massive phantom foreign investment? Reginald scoffed loudly, aggressively, adjusting the neat cuffs of his tailored linen suit. It logically takes money to make serious money, Rachel. That is just basic fundamental economics, something you would clearly know if you had actually finished a truly respectable business degree. I willingly provided Preston with a $2 million liquid capital advance to safely secure the elite foreign investors. I simply stared at him, the horrific realization slowly but inevitably creeping into my sharp mind. A cold, remarkably heavy dread rapidly settled deep in my chest. Where exactly did you get $2 million in raw liquid cash, Reginald? I demanded, dropping the respectful title of Dad completely. Your law firm has been brutally bleeding money for 3 straight years. You have desperately remortgaged the large Atlanta house twice already. Where did the massive cash advance come from? Vivienne laughed, a high-pitched, incredibly cruel sound that grated on my nerves. He intelligently used your grandmother's estate in Washington, D.C., she stated proudly, lifting her chin. We brilliantly collateralized that dusty old useless historic relic your grandmother stubbornly refused to sell. It was just uselessly sitting there generating absolutely nothing. Reginald smartly took out a premium equity line against the entire property. It was a remarkably brilliant strategic move to leverage dead real estate into active booming global capital. The entire room seemed to physically tilt on its axis. My grandmother, the single only person in this entire toxic family who ever truly loved me unconditionally, had left that historic, beautiful home to be safely preserved. She explicitly heavily trusted Reginald to properly maintain the legal trust, ensuring it would safely remain in the family for countless generations. He had secretly, viciously weaponized the only truly pure thing left in our dark family history to foolishly fund a complete delusion. You actually leveraged grandmother's historic house for him. I whispered, the building anger inside me rapidly morphing into an icy, razor-sharp, lethal focus. You blindly risked the only real legacy this family has left on a desperate man who just had his credit card completely seized for severe federal financial fraud. Maya violently rolled her eyes, dramatically sighing. Oh, please just stop being so incredibly dramatic, Rachel. It is legally called an investment. Preston is masterfully turning that small $2 million into a massive $10 million by the very end of the month. We are going to easily buy the estate back and excitedly have $8 million left over in pure liquid profit. Preston is an absolute financial genius. I slowly turned my intense gaze directly to Preston. He was completely, absolutely silent. He was not looking at Maya or Vivienne or Reginald. He was blankly staring at the hardwood floor, his breathing increasingly shallow and highly rapid. He honestly looked exactly like a terrified man standing nervously on the wooden trapdoor of a gallows, desperately waiting for the heavy lever to be violently pulled. I set my water glass down firmly on the marble bar. I reached smoothly into my tote bag and pulled out my sleek tablet. I walked directly over to the yacht's massive 85-inch smart television securely mounted on the dark mahogany wall. I quickly tapped a few specific buttons on my screen, officially enabling the advanced screen mirroring feature. The large television instantly flared to bright life, displaying my tablet's complex interface in high definition for the entire room to clearly see. What are you doing? Reginald demanded, taking a threatening step forward. Turn that screen off immediately. I completely ignored him and opened a highly secure, deeply encrypted financial tracking application I had personally developed specifically for my elite corporate clients. I rapidly typed in a few commands, and a complex digital web of banking transfers instantly appeared on the giant glowing screen. Bold red lines clearly connected various hidden offshore accounts, effectively creating a digital map of precise financial movement. I want you all to pay very close absolute attention to the screen, I said, pointing a finger to a specific distinct transaction block that originated directly from Reginald's primary business account. Here is the massive $2 million equity line you foolishly pulled from grandmother's sacred estate, Dad. Now watch exactly where it goes. I tapped the glass screen. The bold red line moved from Reginald's local bank directly to a shady holding company located in the Cayman Islands. Reginald frowned deeply, his arms aggressively crossed. Yes, that is the exact holding firm Preston legally set up for the foreign elite investors. What exactly is your pointless point? My point, Reginald, is that holding companies are legally supposed to hold money. I tapped the glass screen again. The bold red line instantly moved away from the Cayman Islands account, transferring the entire massive $2 million balance in one single massive consecutive wire. The red line permanently stopped at an account officially labeled with a corporate registry based far away in Macau. Preston did not invest absolutely anything. I said, my voice completely dropping to a lethal, absolutely calm whisper that immediately commanded the entire silent room. Read the actual name of the final receiving account, Maya. Read it clearly out loud right now. Maya nervously squinted at the glowing screen, her voice visibly shaking as she slowly read the large, bold black letters. The Golden Dragon Casino and Resort Macau. I turned slowly to face my arrogant father, watching the absolute pure devastation rapidly crash violently over his rigid features. He wired your $2 million directly to a notorious casino in Macau to completely cover his massive illegal gambling debts. I said coldly, watching Preston physically sink heavily into a nearby chair, deeply burying his pale face in his shaking hands. There is absolutely no $10 million offshore investment. There are no elite foreign investors. The money is completely permanently gone, and your beloved law firm is drowning in debt. I locked eyes securely with my father forcefully delivering the final, undeniable, completely lethal blow. You are broke, Dad. The echo of my words hung over the luxurious cabin of the mega yacht. You are broke, Dad. The absolute silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and profoundly satisfying. For a fraction of a second, I watched my father visibly age. His broad shoulders slumped, and the aggressive posture he had carried for decades simply evaporated. Vivienne stood frozen near the plush leather sofa, her eyes darting between the glowing television screen displaying the offshore bank transfers and my father's pale face. But before the brutal reality of their complete financial ruin could fully settle into their arrogant minds, Maya snapped. She let out a guttural, high-pitched shriek that sounded more animal than human. Maya snatched my sleek silver tablet right off the polished mahogany bar. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the device like a weapon, and her eyes were wide. She raised the expensive piece of technology high above her head. With a scream of pure, unadulterated rage, she slammed it down onto the solid teakwood floor. The sharp, terrible crack of shattering glass pierced the cabin. Shards of the high-definition screen exploded outward, scattering wildly across the expensive, pristine white rug. She stomped on the broken pieces with her sharp designer heels. You are a disgusting liar! Maya screamed, her voice hoarse and raw with desperation. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her chest heaving. You forged those bank statements, Rachel. You fabricated every single piece of that digital trail. You hired some shady internet hacker to create a fake tracking application because you absolutely cannot stand to see me happy. I looked down at the ruined pieces of my tablet scattered across the floor, and then slowly looked back up at my sister. My completely calm demeanor only seemed to fuel her unhinged hysterical rage even further. You are so incredibly bitter. Maya continued, closing the physical distance between us until she was standing mere inches from my face. You are 35 years old. You have always been jealous of me. You are jealous of my perfect interracial high society marriage. You are furious that I found a wealthy, successful white man who actually loves me and provides me with a lifestyle you could only ever dream of experiencing. You desperately want to destroy my perfect life because yours is nothing but an empty shell. You have always been the absolute loser of this family. Maya spat her words, dripping with decades of unchecked entitlement. Do not think for 1 second you can waltz onto this private yacht and pretend you hold any real power over us. I remember exactly who you are, Rachel. I remember the night Mom and Dad finally had enough of your arrogant, disrespectful attitude. I remember standing in the hallway, watching them throw you out the front door when you were only 18 years old. You had absolutely nothing to your name. You were standing out there on the wet pavement, crying in the rain, holding your entire pathetic little life in a trash bag. That is exactly what you are to us. You are the girl with the garbage bag. You are nothing, and you will always be nothing. Vivienne quickly stepped forward instantly, emboldened by Maya's attack. Your sister is absolutely right, Rachel. Vivienne sneered aggressively, adjusting her posture, trying desperately to regain her lost sense of superiority and control over the room. You manufactured this entire ridiculous spectacle because you are completely desperate for our attention. You thought you could come back here waving a fake metal credit card and forged bank documents to scare us into begging for your help. We do not need you. Preston is a senior vice president at a top-tier Wall Street firm. He would never resort to stealing money for a cheap casino in Macau. Reginald finally found his voice, joining the delusional chorus. You always were a vindictive child, Rachel. Reginald growled, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Preston is a financial genius who is saving my law practice. You are just a jealous outsider trying to ruin a brilliant business deal. Get off this yacht before I call the marina security and have you arrested for trespassing. I slowly shifted my gaze away from the screaming, delusional family members and looked directly at the man they were so fiercely defending. Preston was not yelling at me. He was not defending his honor or backing up Maya's desperate claims of his innocence. He was standing completely still near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the dark harbor water, his face completely drained of blood. He looked physically ill, as if he might collapse at any given second. His hands were gripping the edge of a small side table so tightly his knuckles were stark white against his pale skin. He knew it was over. He knew the stolen money was gone, and he knew there was absolutely no way to hide the truth from the authorities anymore. The facade of the brilliant white savior had completely crumbled, leaving behind nothing but a terrified criminal. As Maya opened her mouth to launch into another hysterical tirade, the sharp, sudden sound of a ringing cell phone cut violently through the tense, thick air of the cabin. It was not my phone. It was Preston's. The loud, custom ringtone echoed relentlessly in the confined space of the yacht's luxurious living room. Preston slowly reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped the device on the floor. He pulled the expensive phone out and stared down at the glowing caller ID. The remaining color completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He did not answer the call. He simply stood there, completely paralyzed, as the phone continued to ring relentlessly. "Who is calling you, honey?" Maya demanded, her tone rapidly shifting from aggressive fury to sudden, anxious confusion. "Answer it. Tell them we are dealing with a crazy person right now. Is it the bank? Are they calling to fix the card issue?" Preston slowly raised his heavy head. He looked at Maya, then at Reginald, and finally his wide, terrified eyes locked directly onto mine. He swallowed hard, completely unable to speak. I smiled, taking a slow, highly confident step forward. My expensive flats crunched softly over the shattered glass of my destroyed tablet. "It is not the bank, Maya," I said, my voice incredibly smooth, perfectly calm, and echoing with absolute finality. "I did not just track the stolen money. I reported him to the feds an hour ago. That is the Securities and Exchange Commission calling your perfect husband." The phone kept ringing, a blaring digital siren signaling the complete destruction of their fake elite empire. Maya stood frozen in horror as the devastating reality of federal prison finally shattered her picture-perfect high society illusion forever. The blaring ringtone of Preston's phone finally stopped, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that felt thicker than the humid coastal air outside. Preston stared at the dark screen of his device, his chest heaving as the absolute reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He was no longer the smug, untouchable Wall Street prince. He was a cornered animal, and in that specific moment, the polished gentleman mask he had worn for the past 6 years violently snapped off. He threw the phone onto the plush white rug as if it had physically burned his hand. Then he turned his wild, desperate eyes toward my sister. Maya was still trembling, her hands covering her mouth, but Preston offered her absolutely no comfort. Instead, his face contorted into a mask of pure, vicious disgust. "You think this is my fault?" Preston screamed, his voice cracking with unfiltered rage. "I did what I had to do to keep up with your endless, pathetic demands. Do you have any idea how much money it takes to satisfy your ghetto spending habits, Maya?" He stepped toward her, towering over her shaking frame. "You wanted the Hamptons summer house. You wanted the private jet memberships. You insisted on wearing custom couture to every meaningless charity gala just to prove you belonged in a world that laughs at you behind your back. I drained my own accounts trying to fund your desperate need for validation. You are nothing but a bottomless pit of low-class consumerism dressed up in borrowed diamonds." Maya flinched as if he had physically struck her. The coded racial microaggressions, the blatant disdain for her background, the absolute contempt in his voice completely paralyzed her. This was the wealthy white savior she had worshipped, the man our parents had placed on a pedestal above their own blood. She had spent her entire adult life tearing me down just to prove she was worthy of his high society world. Now he was using their deepest insecurities to deflect his own federal crimes. "And you?" Preston sneered, whirling around to face my father. Reginald was standing frozen near the bar, his courtroom bravado entirely extinguished. "Do not stand there looking at me like you are some innocent victim, Reginald. You are the one who drew up the holding company documents. You provided the absolutely incompetent legal advice that structured the Cayman transfers. You practically handed me the exact blueprint to move that money offshore without triggering a domestic audit. I drafted those documents for a legitimate corporate investment." Reginald sputtered, his voice lacking its usual commanding baritone. "You lied to me, Preston. You manipulated my firm." Preston let out a loud barking laugh that sounded completely unhinged. "I manipulated a desperate failing lawyer who was too blind with greed to do basic due diligence. You were so incredibly eager to have a white hedge fund executive save your sinking ship that you gladly handed over your mother-in-law's historic estate without asking a single intelligent question. You are a pathetic excuse for a legal mind." The sheer disrespect echoing through the mega yacht was too much for my mother to bear. Vivian rushed forward, her pearl necklace rattling against her chest, her hands raised in a frantic, placating gesture. "Preston, please," Vivian begged, keeping her voice in a strained, hushed whisper. "The yacht crew is just outside the doors. They will hear everything. Stop this screaming right now. We have to think of our legacy. We have an elite image to protect. We can quietly fix this." Preston turned his manic gaze to Vivian, looking at her with an expression of absolute, profound pity. "Your legacy," he mocked, spitting the words out. "Vivian, your legacy is a complete joke. You do not have an elite image. You are just a group of desperate frauds pretending to be rich. You lease luxury cars you cannot afford. You rent mega yachts to impress clients who secretly despise you. You drain trust funds to buy basic entry-level Porsches. You are drowning in debt and drowning in your own desperate need for high society approval. The true elite circles of this country have always seen right through your cheap country club facade. You are nothing." The brutal, uncensored truth finally broke the last remaining thread of Reginald's heavily bruised ego. The emasculation was total and absolute. With a sudden roar of blind fury, my 60-year-old father lunged across the polished teakwood deck. He raised his fists, fully intending to physically assault the man who had just destroyed his firm, his finances, and his family's pride. But Preston was faster. He snatched his dropped phone off the rug and held it up like a loaded weapon, stopping my father dead in his tracks just inches away. "Go ahead and punch me, Reginald." Preston threatened, his breathing heavy, his eyes wild with cornered malice. "Hit me right now. But before you do, you should know that I have digital copies of every single tax return you signed for your firm over the last 5 years. The ones where you grossly inflated your revenue to secure fraudulent bank loans. The ones you begged me to help you hide. If you touch me, I will hit send and forward every single unredacted file directly to the Internal Revenue Service." Reginald froze, his fists still raised in the air, his face turning an alarming shade of crimson. "If I go down for wire fraud, your whole family goes to federal prison for tax evasion." Preston panted, a sick, triumphant smile returning to his desperate face. "We are all in the exact same sinking boat, Reginald. You turn me in to save yourselves, and I will make sure we all share the same cell block. You are completely trapped." The heavy reality of mutual assured destruction paralyzed the entire room. Maya was openly sobbing on the sofa, her perfect life in ruins. Vivian was clutching her chest, gasping for air, as her high society dreams went up in smoke. Reginald stood completely defeated, his massive ego finally crushed under the weight of his own financial crimes. They had entirely, completely lost. They were staring down the barrel of total public ruin, bankruptcy, and federal incarceration. I watched this magnificent implosion from my position near the heavy glass doors, feeling an incredible, profound sense of peace. I had waited 17 long years for this exact moment. I watched the people who had treated me like garbage finally face the absolute destruction of their own making. I took a slow step forward, the sound of my shoes drawing their terrified eyes back to me. "Actually, Dad," I said, my voice slicing cleanly through their collective panic, "there is one loophole, but it is going to cost you." The ringing of the phone finally stopped, leaving a thick, heavy silence in its wake. All eyes slowly turned away from the discarded device on the floor and locked onto me, standing calmly by the sliding glass doors. The sudden quiet on the mega yacht was absolutely deafening. Outside, the gentle lapping of the ocean against the massive hull sounded like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of their wealthy illusion. Preston remained slumped in his chair, a broken, empty shell of the arrogant Wall Street executive he had pretended to be just an hour ago. He was staring at the blank screen of his phone, knowing that the federal government was already building a steel cage around his life. My father, Reginald, looked like a man who had just been forcefully shoved out of a high-flying airplane without a parachute. His face was a sickly shade of gray, his broad chest rising and falling in erratic, panicked jerks. He looked from Preston to Maya, and then finally his desperate, terrified gaze landed firmly on me. He had spent his entire life looking down on me, treating me like an embarrassing stain on his perfectly curated high society image. Now I was the only person standing between him and a federal prison sentence. "What loophole?" Reginald asked, his voice trembling so violently it barely sounded like him. It was a pathetic, raspy whisper, completely stripped of the booming courtroom authority he had always wielded like a weapon. "Rachel, please tell me what you mean." I took a slow, measured step back into the center of the plush living room. I crossed my arms and looked at him, letting him completely marinate in his own raw fear. "You are currently chained to a sinking anchor, Dad." I explained, my tone perfectly steady and entirely devoid of any sympathy. "Preston is going down for massive wire fraud and illegal offshore gambling. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service are going to brutally tear his life apart piece by piece. And because you foolishly allowed him to mingle his dirty money with your law firm accounts, they are going to tear your life apart too. They will freeze your assets, seize your properties, and disbar you before the trial even begins." Vivienne let out a sharp, terrified sob, pressing her hands over her mouth. She was literally shaking, her perfectly styled hair coming undone as the reality of losing her precious status completely crushed her. "But I can stop it," I stated clearly, watching their desperate eyes widen with a sudden pathetic glimmer of hope. "My company, Elite Estate Tech, retains a legion of the most vicious, highly paid corporate defense attorneys and forensic accountants in the entire country. They specialize in financial extraction. If I give them the order right now, they can instantly build an impenetrable legal firewall around your law firm. They will meticulously document Preston's fraud, isolate your firm's legitimate revenue, and officially present you as a cooperating victim rather than a willing co-conspirator. I can completely shield you from the federal fallout and keep you out of prison. Reginald let out a massive, shaky breath of relief, his shoulders dropping as he took a step toward me. Thank you. He gasped out, actually reaching a hand out toward me. Rachel, thank you so much. I knew you would not let your own family go down like this. We will pay your lawyers back every single cent once the firm stabilizes. I held up a single hand, stopping him dead in his tracks. I do not want your money, Reginald, I said coldly, watching his face immediately drop back into a mask of pure confusion. I do not need your money, but I am not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. I am doing this for a very specific price, and you are going to pay it right now. I walked over to my designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, sleek black leather portfolio. I unzipped it and withdrew a crisp stack of legal documents, placing them firmly on the polished mahogany dining table. I smoothed my hand over the top page, making sure the bold black text was perfectly visible under the warm ambient lighting of the yacht. This is a direct deed of transfer, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. You are going to sign over the title to grandmother's historic estate in Washington, D.C., returning it to my name immediately. Vivian gasped, stepping out from behind the sofa, her eyes flashing with a sudden, desperate anger. You cannot do that! She shrieked, completely forgetting that she was begging for her freedom just seconds ago. That house is worth millions. It is in the most exclusive neighborhood in Georgetown. It is the only real valuable asset we have left to rebuild our lives once this nightmare is over. You cannot just take it. I turned my icy gaze directly onto my mother. You do not have an asset, Vivian, I corrected her sharply. You have a heavily leveraged property that you treated like a cheap poker chip. Grandmother loved that house. She meticulously tended to those rose gardens every single summer, and she preserved the historic architecture because it meant something real. It was a true legacy. But you and Reginald absolutely hated it because you could not stand the fact that it represented old money you did not actually earn. So the second she passed away, you used it to fund Maya's ridiculous lifestyle, and then you handed the equity over to a gambling addict to save a failing law firm. Maya, who had been quietly weeping in the corner, suddenly looked up, her mascara completely ruined, running in dark black streaks down her flushed cheeks. You cannot take the house, Rachel, Maya pleaded, her voice cracking. Where are we supposed to go? Preston is going to prison. I have nothing left. We need that property to survive. I looked at my golden child sister, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, quiet closure. You should have thought about survival before you let your husband wire $2 million to a casino in Macau, I said simply. I am taking the house back. I am going to restore it to exactly how grandmother left it, and none of you will ever step foot on that property again. I looked back at Reginald, tapping a sleek silver pen against the deed transfer. That is the devil's bargain, Dad. You sign this property completely over to me right now, relinquishing every single legal right and claim to the estate. In exchange, my elite corporate lawyers will save you from spending the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary. If you refuse, I will pack up my things, walk off this yacht, and let the federal government seize everything you own. Reginald stared at the papers, his jaw clenching and unclenching. He was a proud, arrogant man who had spent his entire life dictating the terms of every relationship. Being backed into a corner by the daughter he had deemed a complete failure was a bitter, highly toxic pill he was being forced to swallow. He looked at Vivian, who was silently weeping, nodding her head in a frantic, desperate motion. They both knew they had absolutely no other choice. They were completely, entirely trapped. With a shaking, trembling hand, Reginald slowly picked up the silver pen. He leaned over the polished mahogany table and hastily scrawled his signature across the bottom line of the document, his handwriting jagged and uneven. He shoved the paper toward Vivian, who quickly grabbed the pen and signed her name as the official co-owner, her tears splashing onto the thick parchment. Vivian aggressively threw the pen down onto the table, a nasty, vicious sneer suddenly twisting her tear-stained face. The moment the ink was dry, her toxic arrogance instantly flared back to life. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "You honestly think you are so incredibly smart, Rachel?" Vivian hissed, crossing her arms over her chest, a highly mocking, triumphant look returning to her eyes. "You think you just won? We will just call our own attorneys the second you leave this yacht. We will heavily contest this entire transfer tomorrow morning, claiming we signed it under severe extreme duress. Any competent judge will immediately throw this piece of paper out of court, and we will keep the house anyway. You are such an idiot." I stood perfectly still, watching her gloat, watching them cling so desperately to their final pathetic shred of superiority. I calmly reached out and picked up the signed deed, carefully sliding it back into my black leather portfolio. I zipped it shut with a smooth, quiet sound that echoed loudly in the tense cabin. I looked at my mother and let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a light, breezy sound that caused the triumphant smirk on her face to immediately falter. "You really never pay attention to the fine print, Vivienne," I said, adjusting the strap of my tote bag over my shoulder. "You cannot contest this transfer tomorrow morning. I already had my legal team formally and legally file the initial property transfer documents with the district courts last week when I first discovered the offshore wire fraud." Reginald's eyes widened in sheer, absolute horror, his mouth falling open as the realization hit him. "The estate is already completely legally back in my name," I explained, my smile widening into a sharp, victorious grin. "I did not need your permission to take the house back. I just needed this specific signature today to officially legally waive your standard 30-day appeal period. You just permanently signed away your only right to ever fight me in court." I turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors, leaving my family standing in the absolute ruins of their shattered elite empire, completely destroyed by their own toxic greed. The blaring ringtone of Preston's phone finally stopped, leaving a thick, heavy silence in its wake. All eyes slowly turned away from the discarded device on the floor and locked onto me. Reginald looked like a man who had just been forcefully shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. His face was a sickly shade of gray, his broad chest rising and falling in erratic, panicked jerks. He had spent his entire life looking down on me, treating me like an embarrassing stain on his perfectly curated high society image. Now I was the only person standing between him and a federal prison sentence. "What loophole?" Reginald asked, his voice trembling so violently it barely sounded like him. It was a pathetic, raspy whisper, completely stripped of the booming courtroom authority he had always wielded like a weapon. "Rachel, please tell me what you mean. We will do anything." I took a slow, measured step back into the center of the plush living room. "You are currently chained to a sinking anchor, Dad." I explained, my tone perfectly steady and entirely devoid of any sympathy. "Preston is going down for massive wire fraud. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service are going to brutally tear his life apart. And because you foolishly allowed him to mingle his dirty money with your law firm accounts, they are going to tear your life apart too. They will freeze your assets, seize your properties, and disbar you before the trial even begins." Vivienne let out a sharp, terrified sob, pressing her hands over her mouth. She was literally shaking, her perfectly styled hair coming undone, as the reality of losing her precious status completely crushed her. "Please, Rachel," she begged, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "You have to help us." "I can stop it," I stated clearly, watching their desperate eyes widen with a sudden pathetic glimmer of hope. "My company, Elite Estate Tech, retains a legion of the most vicious, highly paid corporate defense attorneys and forensic accountants in the entire country. They specialize in financial extraction. If I give them the order right now, they can instantly build an impenetrable legal firewall around your law firm. They will meticulously document Preston's fraud, isolate your firm's legitimate revenue, and officially present you as a cooperating victim rather than a willing co-conspirator. I can completely shield you from the federal fallout and keep you out of prison." Reginald let out a massive, shaky breath of relief, his shoulders dropping as he took a step toward me. "Thank you," he gasped out, actually reaching a hand out toward me. "We will pay your lawyers back every single cent once the firm stabilizes." I held up a single hand, stopping him dead in his tracks. "I do not want your money, Reginald," I said coldly. I am not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. I am doing this for a very specific price, and you are going to pay it right now. I walked over to my designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, sleek black leather portfolio. I unzipped it and withdrew a crisp stack of legal documents, placing them firmly on the polished mahogany dining table. I smoothed my hand over the top page, making sure the bold black text was perfectly visible under the warm ambient lighting of the yacht. This is a direct deed of transfer, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. You are going to sign over the title to grandmother's historic estate in Washington, D.C., returning it to my name immediately. Vivian gasped, stepping out from behind the sofa, her eyes flashing with a sudden desperate anger. You cannot do that, she shrieked, completely forgetting that she was begging for her freedom just seconds ago. That house is worth millions. It is in the most exclusive neighborhood in Georgetown. You cannot just take it. I turned my icy gaze directly onto my mother. You do not have an asset, Vivian, I corrected her sharply. You have a heavily leveraged property that you treated like a cheap poker chip. Grandmother loved that house. She meticulously tended to those rose gardens every single summer, and she preserved the historic architecture because it meant something real. It was a true legacy. But you and Reginald absolutely hated it, because you could not stand the fact that it represented old money you did not actually earn. So the second she passed away, you used it to fund Maya's ridiculous lifestyle, and then you handed the equity over to a gambling addict to save a failing law firm. Maya, who had been quietly weeping in the corner, suddenly looked up. Her mascara completely ruined, running in dark black streaks down her flushed cheeks. You cannot take the house, Rachel. Maya pleaded, her voice cracking. Where are we supposed to go? Preston is going to prison. I have nothing left. We need that property to survive. I looked at my golden child sister, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, quiet closure. You should have thought about survival before you let your husband wire $2 million to a casino in Macau, I said simply. I am taking the house back. I am going to restore it to exactly how grandmother left it, and none of you will ever step foot on that property again. I looked back at Reginald, tapping a sleek silver pen against the deed transfer. That is the devil's bargain, Dad. You sign this property completely over to me right now, relinquishing every single legal right and claim to the estate. In exchange, my elite corporate lawyers will save you from spending the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary. If you refuse, I will pack up my things, walk off this yacht, and let the federal government seize everything you own. Reginald stared at the papers, his jaw clenching and unclenching. He was a proud, arrogant man who had spent his entire life dictating the terms of every relationship. Being backed into a corner by the daughter he had deemed a complete failure was a bitter, highly toxic pill he was being forced to swallow. He looked at Vivian, who was silently weeping, nodding her head in a frantic, desperate motion. They both knew they had absolutely no other choice. They were completely, entirely trapped. With a shaking, trembling hand, Reginald slowly picked up the silver pen. He leaned over the polished mahogany table and hastily scrawled his signature across the bottom line of the document, his handwriting jagged and uneven. He shoved the paper toward Vivian, who quickly grabbed the pen and signed her name as the official co-owner, her tears splashing onto the thick parchment. Vivian aggressively threw the pen down onto the table, a nasty, vicious sneer suddenly twisting her tear-stained face. The moment the ink was dry, her toxic arrogance instantly flared back to life. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated venom. We will just contest this tomorrow, claiming duress, you idiot, Vivian hissed, crossing her arms over her chest, a highly mocking, triumphant look returning to her eyes. You think you just won? We will call our own attorneys the second you leave this yacht. Any competent judge will immediately throw this piece of paper out of court, and we will keep the house anyway. I stood perfectly still, watching her gloat, watching them cling so desperately to their final pathetic shred of superiority. I calmly reached out and picked up the signed deed, carefully sliding it back into my black leather portfolio. I looked at my mother and let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a light, breezy sound that caused the triumphant smirk on her face to immediately falter. The transfer was already legally filed last week, I said, adjusting the strap of my tote bag over my shoulder. I just needed your signature to waive the 30-day appeal period. Reginald's eyes widened in sheer absolute horror, his mouth falling open as the realization hit him. I did not need your permission to take the house back. I explained, my smile widening into a sharp, victorious grin. I had already purchased the outstanding debt on the property through an anonymous holding company months ago. The estate was already returning to my name, but Reginald could have used his remaining legal connections to tie the transfer up in endless appeals for years. By leveraging your absolute terror of federal prison, I forced you to sign away your only remaining legal defense. You just permanently signed away your only right to ever fight me in court. I turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors, leaving my family standing in the absolute ruins of their shattered elite empire, completely destroyed by their own toxic greed. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the mega yacht and stepped out into the humid evening air. The transition from the sterile air-conditioned cabin to the warm ocean breeze felt like crossing the threshold from a cage back into the real world. Behind me, the absolute silence that had followed my final revelation shattered into a million jagged pieces. The screaming started almost instantly. It was a chaotic symphony of blame and raw terror. I did not turn around to watch them tear each other apart. I did not look back. I simply walked steadily down the polished teakwood ramp toward the concrete marina dock. My flat shoes clicked rhythmically against the pavement, a steady metronome, marking the true end of a 17-year war. When I reached the end of the long pier, I stopped under the glowing yellow light of a tall street lamp. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the screen. It was time to honor my end of the devil's bargain. I scrolled to my lead corporate attorney and pressed the call button. I gave her the direct command to deploy the legal firewall around Reginald's law firm. She would instantly dispatch a small army of aggressive, highly paid corporate defense attorneys and forensic accountants to Reginald's downtown office. They would violently sever any financial connections between his legitimate firm revenue and Preston's radioactive offshore gambling accounts. I was saving him from complete physical incarceration, but I was leaving him with absolutely nothing else. His pride, his immense wealth, and his golden child, son-in-law, were permanently, completely destroyed. A sleek black town car was waiting for me at the edge of the paved parking lot, its engine purring softly in the cool night air. My driver quickly opened the rear door and I slid into the quiet, luxurious interior, placing my tote bag carefully on the leather seat beside me. As the car pulled away from the harbor, I looked out the tinted window at the dark, reflecting water. The war was finally over. The white knight had been exposed as a common, pathetic criminal. The arrogant parents had been brought to their absolute knees, and the golden child was left with absolutely nothing. I closed my eyes as the car sped toward the airport, ready to fly back to my beautifully restored historic estate in Georgetown. The massive house was empty now, patiently waiting for me to breathe warm life back into its halls. I had successfully reclaimed my true legacy, and I had done it without sacrificing a single piece of my soul. As the sleek black town car merged onto the highway toward the airport, my phone vibrated loudly against the smooth leather seat. I had not just left my family with their shattered egos and ruined reputations. I had also left a highly discreet digital back door open into the mega yacht's onboard security network. My elite tech team had compromised the vessel's internal cameras hours ago. I tapped the glowing screen of my device, bringing up a crystal-clear, high-definition live feed of the main cabin. I leaned back into the plush seat and watched the absolute destruction of Maya's perfect life unfold in real time. Preston was completely unhinged. The feed showed him tearing through the luxurious living space like a trapped animal. He was violently dragging expensive leather duffel bags from the hallway closet and aggressively shoving his tailored suits into them without any care. He was hyperventilating, his face slick with sweat. He knew my legal team was already building the firewall around my father's firm, which meant Preston was entirely exposed to the federal investigators. He had no human shields left. Maya stood paralyzed in the center of the room, watching her husband frantically pack. Her perfect high society illusion was collapsing faster than she could comprehend. Preston grabbed his phone with shaking hands and jabbed at the screen. He was so terrified and frantic that he missed the receiver icon twice before finally connecting the call and dropping the device onto the glass coffee table on speakerphone. A cold, sharp voice echoed through the yacht's cabin. It was Eleanor. Preston's mother was the ultimate old money matriarch, a woman who wielded her generational wealth like a heavy iron club. She had always despised Maya, viewing my sister as a cheap, opportunistic social climber who had somehow tricked her golden boy into marriage. "Preston, you absolute fool!" Eleanor's voice snapped through the speaker, dripping with pure aristocratic venom. "My attorneys just informed me about the federal inquiry into your offshore accounts. You have completely disgraced the family name. Mother, please, I need help." Preston begged, his voice cracking as he zipped a duffel bag with excessive force. Reginald turned on me. "They are trying to pin the entire Cayman Island wire fraud on my accounts. I need the family fixers right now. I will protect our legacy, Preston, but I will not protect your pathetic mistakes." Eleanor replied, her tone absolutely freezing. "I am deploying our crisis management team to shield the family trust. But your ridiculous charade of a marriage is over tonight. I warned you about marrying that low-class gold digger. I told you she would drag you down into the gutter with her." Maya gasped, stepping toward the coffee table, her hands balled into tight fists. "Excuse me," Maya shrieked, her voice trembling with rage. "I am your daughter-in-law. You cannot speak about me like that." Eleanor let out a dry, humorless laugh that sounded like cracking ice. "You are nothing but a temporary liability, Maya. And as of 60 seconds ago, you are a completely unfunded liability. I have just instructed the Wealth Management Division to permanently cancel every single Black Card supplementary account and private line of credit attached to your name. Your financial free ride is officially terminated." Maya frantically pulled her own phone from her designer purse. Her thumbs flew across the screen as she frantically logged into her luxury banking applications. I watched through the security feed as the blood completely drained from Maya's face. Every single account balance read zero. Every credit limit was frozen. Her access to the millions she had so proudly flaunted was instantly vaporized. She was completely broke. "You cannot do this to me!" Maya screamed at the speakerphone, her voice pitching into absolute hysteria. "I am your son's wife. I have a lifestyle to maintain." "You have absolutely nothing," Eleanor countered ruthlessly. "And since we are liquidating your temporary lifestyle, I require the immediate return of the family property you are currently wearing. Preston, get the ring back right now. That $500,000 vintage flawless diamond belongs to the family trust. It was my grandmother's ring, and I will not allow a common thief to walk away with it." Preston's head snapped up, his desperate wild eyes locked directly onto Maya's left hand. The massive diamond engagement ring caught the ambient light of the cabin, sparkling brilliantly against her trembling fingers. It was the absolute crown jewel of Maya's fake high society persona. "Give me the ring, Maya," Preston demanded, taking a slow, aggressive step toward her. His voice had dropped to a dangerous low growl. "My mother is right. It belongs to the estate. Take it off right now." Maya instinctively clutched her left hand to her chest, taking a terrified step backward. Her eyes were wide with panic. "No!" she screamed, shaking her head violently. "No, Preston, you gave this to me. It is mine. It is the only valuable thing I have left. You are not taking it." Preston lunged forward, knocking an expensive vase off a side table as he reached for her. "Give me the damn ring, Maya. I am not going to let you steal a $500,000 family heirloom just because your free ride is over." Maya shrieked and scrambled backward, her designer heels slipping on the polished teakwood floor. She dodged his grasping hands and sprinted down the narrow hallway toward the yacht's luxurious master suite. Preston chased after her, slipping on the scattered debris of the broken vase. Maya threw herself into the bedroom and slammed the heavy, solid mahogany door shut. A loud, sharp click echoed through the microphone as she violently threw the deadbolt, locking herself safely inside. Preston slammed his shoulder against the thick wood, letting out a roar of absolute frustration. "Open the door, Maya!" he screamed, pounding his fists against the heavy mahogany panels. "Open the door and give me the ring before I break this door off its hinges." From inside the locked suite, Maya's muffled, hysterical voice completely lost all restraint. She was screaming at the absolute top of her lungs, her years of built-up resentment finally exploding outward. "I am never giving this ring back!" Maya shrieked, her voice raw and tearing. "Do you have any idea what I have endured to fit into your snobbish, suffocating world, Preston? Do you know how many times I had to bite my tongue and smile while your mother made passive-aggressive comments about my upbringing? Do you know how much it cost me to pretend I cared about your boring country club friends and their pathetic, shallow lives? I spent 6 years transforming myself into the perfect high society prop for your fragile ego." Preston kicked the bottom of the door, leaving a dark scuff mark on the pristine wood. "You are a delusional gold digger," he yelled back. "You loved every second of the money. I earned every single penny of it." Maya screamed back through the thick door. "I tolerated your arrogance. I tolerated your family's barely concealed classist garbage. I smiled through every single humiliating dinner party where your mother treated me like the hired help. You are a criminal, Preston. You ruined my life. This $500,000 diamond is not a family heirloom anymore. This ring is my reparations. It is my payment for surviving you. I am keeping it and I am selling it the second I get off this boat." Preston backed away from the door, his chest heaving, his hands running frantically through his hair. He was completely trapped between the locked door and the reality of his impending federal arrest. He looked wildly around the hallway, searching for something heavy enough to smash the lock. As I watched him desperately tear through a decorative storage chest, looking for a blunt instrument, a new sound began to bleed through the audio feed. It was faint at first, but it was rapidly growing louder. The high-pitched, urgent wail of approaching sirens was cutting through the quiet night air of the marina. Preston froze, dropping a heavy brass statue to the floor. The color drained from his face as the sirens grew deafeningly loud. He slowly walked back into the main cabin and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. I switched the camera angle on my tablet to the exterior deck feed. Out on the dark, choppy water of the harbor, a sleek private water taxi was speeding directly toward the mega yacht. It was flanked by two heavily marked local police harbor patrol boats, their bright red and blue emergency lights violently flashing and reflecting across the dark waves. The water taxi aggressively bumped against the side of the yacht's private boarding platform. A tall, imposing woman wrapped in a severe black designer trench coat stepped onto the deck. It was Eleanor. She did not look like a worried mother coming to comfort her son. She looked like a highly trained executioner arriving to finish a job. Eleanor stood tall on the polished deck, flanked by 4 heavily armed local police officers. She reached into the inner pocket of her expensive coat and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with an official court seal. She looked directly up at the glass windows where Preston was standing, frozen in absolute terror. "I am not here for you, Preston." Eleanor called out, her voice amplified and cold, carrying easily over the sound of the idling police boat engines. "The federal authorities can have you. I am here for the thief locked in the master suite." She turned to the police officers and handed them the documents. "I have an emergency court order signed by a superior court judge. My former daughter-in-law is in possession of a stolen $500,000 family heirloom. Break down the door and retrieve my property immediately." 2 massive police officers stepped past Eleanor, their heavy tactical boots thudding loudly against the pristine teakwood deck. They moved with absolute authority, ignoring Preston, who shrank back against the wall like a terrified child. The officers marched down the narrow hallway and stopped in front of the locked master suite. One of them raised a heavy black boot and delivered a single devastating kick just below the handle. The solid mahogany door, which had been designed to keep out the noise of the ocean, splintered with a loud, violent crack. The locking mechanism gave way entirely, and the heavy wood swung inward, crashing loudly against the interior wall. Maya let out a piercing, terrified shriek. She was backed into the furthest corner of the lavish bedroom, cowering between a velvet chaise lounge and the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her expensive designer gown was twisted and wrinkled, her perfect makeup completely destroyed by rivers of black mascara. She was clutching her left hand tightly against her chest, guarding the massive diamond ring as if her actual life depended on it. "Ma'am, you need to step forward and surrender the property." The lead officer commanded, his voice echoing through the suite with zero sympathy. We have a lawful court order for the immediate seizure of the ring. If you refuse to comply, we will place you under arrest for grand larceny and physically remove it from your person." Maya looked wildly around the room, her panicked eyes searching for any way out. She looked past the officers and saw Preston standing safely behind his mother's shoulder in the main cabin. "Preston, tell them to stop." Maya sobbed, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "Tell them you gave this to me. Tell them it is mine. You are my husband. Do something." Preston did absolutely nothing. He refused to even make eye contact with the woman he had married. He stared at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, completely paralyzed by his mother's commanding presence and his own looming criminal charges. He was abandoning Maya to the wolves just as easily as he had abandoned his fiduciary duties to his investors. When the lead officer unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt, the final shred of Maya's resistance broke. She let out a guttural sobbing wail and slowly slid the massive glittering ring off her finger. She pushed past the officers and stormed into the main cabin, her entire body shaking with humiliated rage. She raised her hand and violently threw the ring onto the heavy glass coffee table. The metal hit the thick glass with a sharp, harsh clatter, spinning for a few seconds before coming to a complete stop under the bright overhead lights. "There is your stupid heirloom," Maya spat, glaring at her mother-in-law with pure venom. "Take it and get off this yacht." Eleanor did not flinch. She did not even look at the ring resting on the table. Instead, she crossed her arms over her black designer trench coat and let out a cold, dismissive scoff. "I am not touching that until it has been thoroughly authenticated," Eleanor announced, her voice slicing cleanly through the tense cabin air. "You are an incredibly careless, clumsy woman, Maya. You have spent the last 6 years treating my family's historic wealth like a bottomless credit limit. You just threw a $500,000 flawless diamond onto a glass table like a petulant toddler throwing a tantrum. I will not put it past you to have damaged the platinum setting, chipped the stone, or somehow ruined the structural integrity of the piece in your hysterical rage. I demand a full inspection right here, right now, before I sign any police release forms acknowledging its safe return." Eleanor snapped her fingers with sharp aristocratic authority. From the back of the police escort, a small, precise man stepped forward. He was wearing a meticulously tailored gray suit and carrying a sleek silver metal briefcase. He moved with the quiet, deliberate grace of someone who handled priceless artifacts for a living. This was Eleanor's personal jeweler, a man retained exclusively to manage and appraise the family's vast collection of historical assets. Vivian, who had been watching this entire humiliating spectacle unfold from the background, suddenly found her voice. Despite the fact that her entire financial world was currently collapsing, she simply could not stand by and let Eleanor publicly insult her daughter's supposed high society grace. Vivian stepped forward, aggressively smoothing down the front of her ruined silk blouse, desperately trying to salvage some pathetic shred of her aristocratic dignity in front of the local police. "How absolutely dare you accuse my daughter of damaging your property?" Vivian sneered, pointing an accusatory finger at Eleanor. Maya would never mistreat fine jewelry. She was raised to appreciate the finer things in life. She is accustomed to genuine luxury and treats her possessions with the utmost high society grace. Furthermore, that ring is nothing but a cheap, outdated trinket compared to the lifestyle my daughter truly deserves. You should be thanking us for allowing your son to associate with our family. We elevated your boring old money status with our vibrant modern connections. You are just bitter because your precious son chose a beautiful young woman over your suffocating control." Eleanor slowly turned her head and looked at Vivian as if she were inspecting a particularly disgusting insect that had crawled onto the deck. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply delivered a look of such profound, absolute contempt that Vivian's aggressive posture immediately deflated. "Vivian, you are a bankrupt fraud standing on a rented boat wearing leased pearls," Eleanor stated, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "Do not ever presume to lecture me about luxury or status. You and your daughter are common grifters, and tonight the grift is permanently over." Eleanor turned her attention back to the jeweler, completely dismissing my mother from existence. "Inspect the stone, Arthur," she commanded. "Tell me exactly what this woman has done to my grandmother's ring." The small man nodded respectfully. He placed his silver briefcase on a side table, unlatched it, and withdrew a professional jeweler's loupe and a small digital testing device. He approached the glass coffee table with extreme care. He picked up the heavy, glittering ring, holding it up toward the harsh, bright overhead lights of the yacht's cabin. He screwed the loupe into his right eye and spent a long, agonizing minute turning the stone side to side, inspecting the facets, the cut, and the setting. The entire room held its breath. Maya stood with her arms crossed, a defensive scowl plastered across her tear-stained face, fully expecting the jeweler to confirm the ring's immense value and perfect condition. She wanted the validation. She wanted Eleanor to hear that the $500,000 diamond was completely flawless. The jeweler frowned. He lowered the ring and removed the loupe from his eye, a deeply confused expression washing over his features. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small digital diamond tester pen. He pressed the metal tip of the device firmly against the flat table of the massive center stone. Instead of emitting the rapid, high-pitched sequence of beeps that would indicate a genuine natural diamond, the device let out a flat, dull, continuous tone. A bright red light flashed on the side of the pen. The jeweler pressed the button again, resetting the device. He tested the stone a second time. The exact same dull, flat beep echoed through the quiet cabin. The red light flashed again. The jeweler slowly lowered his tools. He looked at the ring in his hand and let out a heavy, weary sigh. He turned to face Eleanor, his expression a mixture of professional embarrassment and grim certainty. "Madam," the jeweler said, his voice clear and projecting perfectly into the dead silence of the room. "This is not the family heirloom. The setting is a very clever replica, but the center stone is entirely fake. This is cubic zirconia." The absolute shock that hit the room was physically palpable. The air was instantly sucked out of the cabin. Maya froze, her jaw dropping open as the words slowly processed in her brain. Vivian stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the sofa, her hands flying to her face in sheer horror. "A fake," Maya whispered, her voice completely hollow. "That is impossible. It is a $500,000 diamond. I had it insured. I wore it to every gala." "It is a piece of cut glass, madam." The jeweler corrected her politely but firmly. "It is worth perhaps $200 at a standard costume jewelry retailer." Eleanor did not look at Maya. She did not look at the jeweler. She slowly turned her deadly, freezing gaze directly onto her son. Preston was practically trying to merge his body with the wooden wall panels behind him. He looked like he was about to physically vomit. "Where is the real ring, Preston?" Eleanor demanded, her voice shaking with a terrifying, suppressed fury. Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between his mother, the police officers, and his completely stunned wife. "I pawned it." Preston finally choked out the confession, tearing out of his throat like jagged glass. "I pawned the real heirloom 8 months ago. I needed the cash to cover my tracks. The offshore accounts were bleeding dry, and the federal investigators were starting to ask questions about the missing capital. I needed liquidity to bribe a compliance officer. So I took the diamond when Maya was at a spa weekend and had a jeweler swap it out for a synthetic replica. I needed the money to save myself. I am so sorry." Maya let out a sound that barely registered as human. It was a broken, pathetic whimper of total, absolute defeat. She looked down at the empty spot on her left hand, where the fake ring had sat for nearly a year. The realization was absolute and completely devastating. She had spent the last 6 years enduring a loveless, toxic marriage. She had tolerated Preston's arrogance, his white savior complex, and his blatant disrespect for her background. She had alienated her only sister and actively participated in destroying her own family's moral compass, all to secure her place in the elite high society world. And in the end, it was all for absolutely nothing. The wealth was a complete lie. The prestige was a total fabrication. Maya had traded her family, her loyal sister, and every last ounce of her personal dignity for a worthless piece of glass. The police officers did not waste another single second. At Eleanor's sharp command, they grabbed Preston by his expensive tailored suit jacket and roughly hauled him toward the exit. He did not fight them. He did not even look back at Maya, who was still crumpled on the floor, clutching the fake cubic zirconia diamond. Preston simply hung his head and let the officers drag him out into the humid night air. Eleanor followed right behind them, stepping onto her private water taxi with the rigid posture of a conquering general. The powerful engines roared to life, and within moments, the police boats and the private taxi sped away into the dark harbor, leaving the three of us completely alone in the wrecked main cabin of the mega yacht. The silence that fell over the room was heavy and suffocating. Maya remained on the floor, her shoulders shaking as silent tears carved fresh paths through her ruined makeup. She looked utterly broken, completely hollowed out by the realization that her entire life was a carefully constructed mirage. But my mother Vivian did not drop to the floor to comfort her sobbing daughter. She did not wrap her arms around Maya or offer a single word of maternal sympathy. Instead, Vivian aggressively smoothed down the front of her silk blouse and began to pace the length of the cabin, her designer heels clicking sharply against the teakwood floor. Her mind was working furiously, visibly rejecting the absolute devastation that had just occurred. Vivian possessed a highly toxic psychological defense mechanism. Whenever reality became too ugly, she simply rewrote it on the spot. "Stop crying, Maya!" Vivian snapped, her voice echoing harshly in the large room. "Stop acting like a pathetic victim right now. We are going to spin this. We will control the narrative before Preston's arrest hits the morning papers. We will issue a public statement that you discovered his financial irregularities and immediately filed for divorce to protect your own impeccable moral standing. We will play the victims, and the high society crowd will absolutely eat it up." Maya just let out another broken whimper, completely unable to process her mother's callous strategic planning. I walked over to the plush white leather sofa and slowly sat down, crossing my legs and resting my arms on the backrest. I watched my mother operate with a cold, quiet fascination. She was a captain rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, entirely convinced the ship was not actually sinking. "We need to solidify our social position immediately." Vivienne continued, speaking more to herself than to either of us. "The federal investigation is going to freeze Reginald's firm accounts by tomorrow morning. If we lose our liquid capital, we absolutely cannot afford to lose our social status. The Black Elite Country Club is our fortress. It is the absolute center of our entire social universe. If we project total confidence there, the rest of the community will fall right in line." Vivian stopped pacing and marched over to her designer handbag, snatching her phone from the front pocket. She unlocked the screen with frantic, rapid movements. "I am calling Winston Sterling right now," Vivian announced, her voice dripping with a sudden, desperate arrogance. "He is the president of the club's board of directors. I am going to have him fast-track the spring charity gala to this coming weekend. We will host a massive table. We will be seen laughing and drinking champagne. It will be the ultimate display of our family's absolute resilience." Vivian aggressively tapped the screen and hit the speakerphone icon, setting the device down on the glass coffee table right next to the discarded fake engagement ring. She wanted Maya to hear this. She wanted Maya to be reassured that their elite status was completely untouchable. And more importantly, she wanted me to hear it. She wanted to prove to me that despite taking back grandmother's estate and unleashing the federal authorities on her son-in-law, she still held the ultimate high society power. The phone rang twice before a deep, tired voice answered. Winston speaking. "Winston, darling, it is Vivian." My mother practically sang into the microphone, instantly adopting her sweetest, most cloying high society voice. "I know it is terribly late, but I simply had to call you regarding the spring charity gala." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. "Vivian," Winston finally said, his tone noticeably stiff and highly uncomfortable. "This is really not a good time." "Nonsense, Winston." Vivian pushed forward, completely ignoring his clear hesitation. "I am calling to call in a favor. I need you to assemble the board tomorrow morning and move the gala up to this Saturday. I know it is short notice, but I am willing to personally underwrite the catering costs." Our family has some rather stressful legal news breaking tomorrow regarding Preston, but I want to assure you our family remains the absolute pillar of this community. We need to project an image of total normalcy and strength. Vivian did not even pause for breath. She launched into a loud, aggressive monologue boasting about her untouchable social rank. You know perfectly well that I practically built the charity board from scratch, Winston. Vivian bragged, her voice echoing through the yacht cabin. The Wellington name has maintained an impeccable standing in this community for 3 decades. We bring the highest tier of donors to the club. We are the social fabric of the Black elite. Moving the gala up is a small request considering everything my family has done to elevate the prestige of your establishment. I sat perfectly still on the white leather sofa watching her weave her desperate, pathetic web of lies. She was clinging to a phantom empire. Winston cleared his throat. The sound was harsh and grating through the phone speaker. Vivian, please stop talking, he commanded, completely dropping his usual polite country club demeanor. Vivian blinked, her mouth snapping shut in genuine shock. No one ever interrupted her. No one ever spoke to her with such blatant disrespect. I cannot move the gala for you, Vivian, Winston stated, his voice entirely drained of any warmth. And you will not be underwriting the catering costs. In fact, you will not be attending the gala at all. What are you talking about, Winston? Vivian demanded, her voice rising into a sharp, offended shriek. I am a founding platinum member of that club. I demand to know why you are speaking to me this way. Winston let out a heavy, weary sigh. Because you are no longer a member, Vivian. Your membership was officially revoked an hour ago. Maya slowly raised her head from the floor, her red-rimmed eyes widening in fresh terror. Vivian grabbed the edge of the glass coffee table, her knuckles turning completely white. Revoked. Vivian gasped out the word, sounding like she had just been physically struck. You cannot revoke my membership. Reginald and I have been members since the club opened. We pay $50,000 a year in dues. You do not have the authority to do this, Winston. I will sue the board of directors. I will destroy your reputation. I do not have the authority, Vivian, but the new majority owner certainly does. Winston explained, his tone turning ice-cold and resolute. The club has been facing massive financial deficits for the past 2 years. We were quietly facing bankruptcy. Early this evening, an anonymous corporate holding company purchased 60% of the club's outstanding debt and assumed total majority control of the board. Vivian's chest heaved, her panicked breaths echoing in the quiet cabin. So what? She screamed. What does some new corporate owner care about my family's membership? Because the very first mandate issued by the new owner was an immediate permanent lifetime ban for you, Reginald and Maya, Winston stated with brutal, absolute clarity. The directive was highly specific. You are no longer welcome on the premises. Your names have been flagged at the security gates. If any of you attempt to enter the property, the local police will be called, and you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. I am sorry, Vivian, but your family is completely entirely exiled from the club. The line went dead with a sharp click, leaving an oppressive ringing silence in its wake. Vivian stared at the dark screen of her phone, her entire body vibrating with a mixture of pure shock and unadulterated rage. She could not comprehend it. Her final fortress, her ultimate safe haven, had just been brutally ripped away from her. Who? Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking as she looked wildly around the cabin. Who would do this? Who has enough money to buy out the entire country club just to ban us? I slowly leaned forward on the white leather sofa. I reached into my designer tote bag and smoothly pulled out a thick, heavy metal card. It was matte black with silver engraved lettering, the ultimate symbol of supreme executive ownership. I held it up between my index and middle fingers, tapping the heavy metal edge against the glass surface of the coffee table. The sharp, rhythmic clinking sound immediately drew Vivian and Maya's frantic attention. They both slowly turned their heads to look at me, their eyes locking onto the heavy black card resting in my hand. I looked directly at my mother, my expression perfectly calm, entirely victorious, and completely devoid of any mercy. Hi, Mom. I said, my voice soft, but carrying absolute finality. That would be me. Vivian's mouth fell open, a silent scream dying in the back of her throat as the final remaining pillar of her high society empire completely collapsed into dust. Vivienne collapsed backward onto the plush, white leather sofa, her pristine image finally shattered into unrecognizable pieces. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a long, pathetic wail that sounded more like a dying animal than a high society matriarch. Maya simply stared at the floor, completely catatonic, her fake cubic zirconia ring entirely forgotten on the glass table. I stood there absorbing the absolute silence that followed my mother's complete psychological breakdown. The yacht gently rocked beneath us, a stark physical contrast to the absolute violent upheaval happening inside the main cabin. I turned my attention to the only person who had remained completely quiet during this entire exchange. Reginald stood in the shadows near the customized teakwood bar. He was watching his wife and his golden child completely fall apart, and yet his face did not register a single ounce of sympathy or concern. Instead, his jaw was locked in a tight, rigid line. He slowly poured himself a glass of amber liquid from a heavy crystal decanter, taking a long, measured sip. The sheer terror of federal prison that had possessed him just an hour ago seemed to suddenly evaporate, replaced by a dark, venomous calculation. He set the heavy crystal glass down with a sharp clink that cut right through Vivienne's quiet sobbing. Reginald walked across the room, his heavy footsteps deliberate and unhurried. He bypassed Vivienne entirely, ignoring her pathetic weeping, and stopped directly in front of me. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and slowly withdrew a yellowed sealed envelope. It looked incredibly old, the corners bent, and the thick parchment paper slightly stained with age. He held it up between his thick fingers, a nasty superior smirk twisting his features. He thought he had found the ultimate checkmate. "Do not think for 1 second that you hold all the cards, Rachel." Reginald said, his voice dropping into that familiar, booming courtroom register he used to intimidate hostile witnesses. "You may have outsmarted your mother, and you may have cornered my law firm, but you are forgetting one crucial, fundamental detail. You are dealing with a man who has kept the darkest secrets of this family buried for over 30 years. I watched him staring at the old envelope. I did not move a single muscle, allowing him to bask in his momentary illusion of power. You always wondered why you were treated differently." Reginald continued, his tone dripping with toxic satisfaction. "You spent your entire pathetic childhood trying to figure out why I favored Maya, why I looked at you with absolute disgust, why nothing you ever achieved was good enough for me. You thought it was simply because you were inadequate. You thought it was because you lacked the natural Wellington grace and pedigree." Vivienne suddenly lifted her head from her hands, her tear-streaked face going absolutely pale. "Reginald, no." She gasped out, her voice trembling with a brand new kind of terror. "You promised me you would never bring that up. You swore you destroyed those papers." Reginald ignored her completely, keeping his dark, triumphant eyes locked entirely on me. "You are not my daughter, Rachel." Reginald announced, the words hitting the quiet cabin like a physical strike. "You do not have a single drop of Wellington blood in your veins. Your mother had a sordid little affair before we were officially married. You are the product of her temporary lapse in judgment with a man she was far too cowardly to actually stay with. I only agreed to raise you to protect the family reputation from a massive public scandal. I agreed to put my name on your birth certificate to save Vivienne from high society ruin, but I never considered you my child. You were nothing but an unfortunate obligation." I stood my ground, letting the heavy words hang in the air. Maya gasped, staring at her mother in complete disbelief. Vivienne squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to look at anyone, her shoulders shaking with fresh sobs. "But that is not the best part," Reginald said, stepping closer, his smile widening into a vicious, predatory grin. "Your biological father was not some penniless nobody. He was a highly successful industrialist. He possessed the kind of immense generational wealth that made my law firm look like a corner lemonade stand. And when he died, he left a very specific provision in his will. He left a $10 million irrevocable trust fund exclusively for his only biological daughter." Reginald tapped the yellowed envelope against his palm, the thick paper making a dull slapping sound. "These are the original sealed documents, Rachel. The official legal papers naming you as the sole beneficiary of a $10 million fortune. Your mother and I intercepted them decades ago. We legally buried them so deep inside a maze of shell corporations that no one would ever find them. We decided you did not deserve to inherit a massive fortune while you were living under my roof, eating my food and tarnishing my name. He reached into his pocket with his other hand and pulled out a sleek silver cigar lighter. He flicked the metal lid open and ignited the flame. The bright orange fire cast dancing shadows across his cruel face. This envelope is the only physical proof linking you to that specific trust account. Reginald threatened, holding the flame dangerously close to the fragile paper. If I burn these documents right now, you will permanently lose any legal path to claim your true heritage. $10 million will evaporate into thin air, and you will never even know the name of the man who actually loved you enough to leave it for you. He moved the flame closer, the heat radiating against the ancient paper, causing the edges to curl slightly. So here is my final offer, Rachel. Reginald growled, his voice turning harsh and commanding. You are going to call your corporate attack dogs off my law firm. You are going to sign the Georgetown estate back over to Vivian and me. And you are going to permanently reinstate our country club memberships. You will fix every single piece of this mess you created tonight. In exchange, I will hand you this envelope, and you can finally go collect your precious $10 million. If you refuse, I will drop this envelope into the yacht's fireplace and watch your actual legacy burn to ashes right in front of your eyes. I looked at the flame flickering near the yellowed paper. I looked at Reginald's triumphant, desperate face. He genuinely believed he had just cornered me. He honestly thought he was dangling the ultimate prize in front of my face, a massive fortune and the truth about my actual identity. I let out a slow, soft sigh. I did not panic. I did not beg. I simply reached back into my designer tote bag. I bypassed my phone and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. It was stamped with the official watermark of the premier wealth management bank in New York City. I looked directly into Reginald's eyes and smoothly slid the thick folder across the polished surface of the glass coffee table. It came to a stop right next to Maya's discarded fake cubic zirconia ring. Reginald frowned, the lighter flame wavering slightly in his hand. What is this? He demanded, his triumphant smirk immediately faltering. That is a certified bank statement, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You can go ahead and burn your little envelope, Reginald. I do not need it. I have not needed it for a very long time. Reginald stared at the folder, his thick brow furrowing in deep confusion. He slowly extinguished the silver lighter, dropping it back into his pocket. He reached down and picked up the manila envelope. He flipped it open and began reading the top page. I watched the blood rapidly drain from his face, replacing his arrogant flush with pure paper-white shock. His hands began to shake so violently the heavy parchment paper rattled loudly in his grip. You honestly think you are the only person in this family capable of digging up buried secrets? I asked, stepping forward, closing the distance between us. You think you are the only one who knows how to navigate a maze of shell corporations? I found out about my biological father 5 years ago. I hired a private investigative firm the exact same week you and Vivian kicked me out of the house and officially disowned me for refusing to marry your wealthy business partner. Vivian let out a sharp gasp, finally opening her eyes to stare at me in absolute, unadulterated horror. I found his original attorneys. I continued, my voice rising with a cold, unstoppable power. I took a simple DNA test to legally prove my identity, and I forcefully claimed that trust fund the very next day. I already collected the $10 million, Reginald. It has been sitting securely in my private accounts for half a decade. Reginald's mouth opened and closed, his eyes darting frantically across the bank statements, proving my massive net worth. No, he stammered, dropping the folder onto the floor as if it burned him. This is impossible. We hid those files. We blocked your access. You underestimated me. I corrected him sharply, my voice echoing through the cabin. Just like you have underestimated me every single day of my life. You thought kicking me out with absolutely nothing would break me. You thought throwing me out into the street would force me to come crawling back, begging for your conditional toxic approval. But all you actually did was push me directly toward the exact resources I needed to destroy you. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his chest, driving the final nail into his coffin. What exactly do you think I used as the initial seed money to launch Elite Estate Tech? I asked, a sharp, vicious smile finally breaking across my face. I took the $10 million you desperately tried to hide from me, and I used every single penny of it to build the corporate empire that is currently dismantling your entire life. My real father funded your absolute destruction, and you were too blindly arrogant to even see it coming. Reginald stood completely frozen, his massive frame seeming to shrink under the crushing weight of his ultimate failure. The thick manila folder slipped from his trembling fingers, scattering the certified bank statements across the glass coffee table right next to Maya's worthless cubic zirconia ring. He opened his mouth to speak, but his legendary booming voice was completely gone. He had spent my entire life trying to erase my existence and steal my heritage. Now the very fortune he had tried to bury had been weaponized against him. He stumbled backward, sinking heavily into a plush leather armchair, a broken hollow shell of a man. But the tense silence in the cabin did not last long. Maya, who had been sitting catatonic on the floor, suddenly snapped out of her shock. The realization that I was the actual architect of her total destruction ignited a feral, desperate rage inside her. She had just lost her $500,000 ring, her husband, and her elite country club status, all in the span of 30 minutes. She scrambled to her feet, her ruined designer gown tangling around her legs. She lunged across the room toward her discarded designer handbag and violently ripped her sleek silver laptop from inside. She slammed the computer down onto the polished mahogany dining table, her fingers flying aggressively across the keyboard. "You think you are untouchable, Rachel?" Maya hissed, her voice vibrating with pure malicious venom. "You think just because you have billions of dollars and elite corporate lawyers that you can just walk in here and dismantle my entire life without any consequences?" I watched her frantic movements, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical, quiet curiosity. "What exactly do you think you are doing, Maya?" I asked, my tone perfectly level. "You have no money, no status, and a husband who just threw you to the wolves. You have absolutely no leverage left." "I have the press, you arrogant idiot!" Maya screamed, a vicious, manic smile spreading across her tear-stained face. She aggressively hammered the keys, her eyes locked onto the glowing screen. "You are taking Elite Estate Tech public next month. Your highly anticipated initial public offering is completely dependent on your flawless, pristine corporate reputation. Institutional investors demand absolute perfection. So let us see how much your precious company is worth after the tabloids publish an exclusive, highly detailed exposé claiming your entire corporate empire is actually a massive front for an illegal elite escort ring." Vivian gasped from the sofa, her hands flying to her mouth. "Maya, what are you doing?" she whispered, terrified of provoking me further. "I am destroying her mom," Maya yelled back, not taking her eyes off the glowing screen. "I am sending an anonymous encrypted tip to the biggest gossip blogs and financial tabloids in New York and London. I am including fabricated testimonies from fake whistleblowers claiming that Elite Estate Tech uses its luxury property portfolio to facilitate illegal private parties for corrupt politicians and foreign billionaires. It does not matter if it is a complete lie, Rachel. The scandal alone will trigger an immediate federal investigation. Your investors will absolutely panic and completely pull their funding. Your highly anticipated IPO will instantly crash and burn to the ground." Maya grabbed the wireless mouse, her manicured finger hovering directly over the bright blue send button. The malicious smile on her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged triumph. She truly believed she had found the ultimate kill switch. She thought she could drag me down into the exact same gutter she was currently drowning in. "I am going to hit send, Rachel," Maya threatened, her voice dropping to a dangerous, desperate whisper. "I am going to completely ruin your reputation. Unless you immediately call off your lawyers, drop the deed transfer to the Georgetown estate, and wire $10 million into my personal offshore account right now. You are going to buy my silence, or I am going to burn your company to ashes." I stood perfectly still in the center of the luxurious cabin, the warm ocean breeze drifting through the broken master suite door. I looked at my sister, hovering her finger over the mouse, completely consumed by her own toxic delusion. She had traded her family, her dignity, and her soul for a fake diamond, and now she was trying to trade a fake story for a $10 million ransom. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a clear, bright sound that echoed off the teakwood walls, causing Maya's manic smile to falter slightly. I did not rush toward the table. I did not beg her to stop. I calmly turned my back on her and walked over to the massive flat-screen television mounted above the yacht's customized bar. I picked up the sleek silver remote control resting on the marble counter. I pointed it at the screen and pressed the power button. "Go ahead and hit send, Maya," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. "Send your little email. Send it to every single tabloid and gossip blog on the internet. But you might want to look at the screen first." The massive television flickered to life immediately, tuning into a global 24-hour news network. The screen was dominated by a bright, glaring red banner flashing across the bottom. The bold white letters spelled out a breaking news alert that was currently being broadcast to millions of viewers around the entire world. Breaking news: prominent socialite family implicated in mega fraud. The news anchor was standing in front of a live shot of Reginald's downtown law firm. Federal agents in dark windbreakers were actively carrying heavy cardboard boxes of physical evidence out of the glass double doors. The anchor's voice filled the quiet yacht cabin, delivering the final fatal blow to the Wellington family legacy. "We are following breaking developments in a massive federal investigation." The anchor announced, her tone serious and urgent. "Authorities have just raided the offices of prominent defense attorney Reginald Wellington. Sources inside the Justice Department confirm that Wellington and his son-in-law, Preston Vance, are the primary targets of a multi-million-dollar offshore wire fraud and illegal gambling syndicate. Arrest warrants have officially been issued, and authorities are currently moving to freeze all associated domestic and international assets, including several luxury properties and a private yacht currently docked in the harbor." The broadcast cut to a split screen, showing a highly unflattering paparazzi photograph of Preston alongside a picture of Reginald entering the courthouse from a previous trial. Maya slowly lowered her hand from the computer mouse, her entire body going completely rigid. The color rapidly drained from her face as she stared blankly at the massive television screen. The glowing blue send button on her laptop suddenly meant absolutely nothing. Vivian let out a sharp, agonizing wail, burying her face in the sofa cushions as the brutal reality of their public disgrace finally hit her. They were not just ruined financially, they were completely destroyed socially, globally, and permanently. I turned back to face my sister, crossing my arms over my chest. I looked at her with pure, absolute, icy victory. "I already leaked the real story, Maya," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any pity. "I sent the entire heavily documented dossier of Preston's wire fraud and Reginald's complicity directly to the federal authorities and the global press hours ago. The entire world already knows exactly who you people really are. They know you are frauds. They know you are criminals. They know your entire high society life is built on stolen money and lies." Maya's hands began to shake uncontrollably. She looked down at her laptop screen, her fabricated email glaring back at her. "If you hit send on that ridiculous fake escort story right now, it will not ruin my IPO." I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "It will completely backfire. The press will immediately trace the IP address back to this yacht. Your fake email will just look like the desperate ramblings of a cornered criminal trying to distract the media from her own family's massive federal indictment. It will only make you look more guilty, Maya. It will completely destroy whatever tiny shred of credibility you have left." Maya stared at the television screen, listening to the news anchor detail the exact amount of money Preston had stolen. She realized she had absolutely no leverage, no power, and no escape. She was completely trapped in a nightmare of her own making. With a loud, agonizing sob, Maya violently shoved the laptop away from her. The expensive silver machine slid across the mahogany dining table and crashed onto the hard teakwood floor, shattering the screen into a spider web of dead pixels. She collapsed into the nearest chair, pulling her knees up to her chest and rocking back and forth, crying uncontrollably. Reginald remained slumped in his leather armchair, staring blankly at his own face, broadcast on the national news. He had spent his entire life obsessing over his elite reputation, dictating the terms of every single relationship, and stepping on anyone who got in his way. Now he was watching his legacy burn to ashes on live television. I stood in the center of the ruined cabin, the bright lights of the television illuminating the complete destruction of my toxic family. I had not just survived their abuse, I had weaponized it. I had taken every ounce of their cruelty, their arrogance, and their deceit, and turned it into the very instrument of their downfall. I adjusted the strap of my tote bag on my shoulder, feeling lighter than I had in 17 years. The toxic chains of my past were permanently broken. The heavy silence that had settled over the ruined cabin was suddenly shattered by a violent pounding on the exterior glass doors. Before anyone could even process the noise, the heavy doors were forcefully shoved open. A short, stocky man wearing a crisp white Marina uniform marched into the room, his face flushed a deep, angry red. He was flanked by 4 massive maritime security officers dressed in dark tactical gear with heavy flashlights and radios clipped to their utility belts. The men moved with swift military precision, instantly fanning out across the expensive teakwood floor and taking up commanding positions around the perimeter of the room. The stocky man clutched a digital tablet in his hand, and he glared at the 3 remaining members of the Wellington family with absolute, undisguised disgust. He introduced himself loudly as Captain Rossi, the primary owner and operator of the luxury yacht charter company. He did not ask if everyone was all right. He did not offer any polite high society greetings. He marched directly up to the glass coffee table and pointed a thick, stubby finger directly at Reginald, who was still slumped motionless in the leather armchair. "Your charter is officially terminated." Captain Rossi barked, his voice easily cutting through the sound of Maya's continuous pathetic weeping. "The black card your son-in-law used to secure this $250,000 weekly rental was just flagged by our payment processor for massive international wire fraud. The bank completely reversed the authorization 10 minutes ago and locked the account. You have absolutely no funds securing this vessel." Vivienne gasped, taking a shaky step back from the aggressive marina owner. Her eyes darted frantically toward the television screen, which was still actively broadcasting the federal raid on her husband's law firm. She tried to summon her usual aristocratic outrage, but her voice came out as a weak, trembling whisper. "There must be some kind of banking error." Vivienne stammered desperately, trying to smooth down her wrinkled silk blouse. "We are the Wellington family. We have impeccable credit. You cannot just storm in here and speak to us this way. I do not care if you are the King and Queen of England." Captain Rossi snapped right back, completely immune to her pathetic attempt at pulling rank. "The federal authorities just contacted my office directly. They informed me that every single asset connected to your name is currently being seized. The charter agreement you signed is completely null and void due to fraudulent misrepresentation. As of this exact second, you are officially trespassing on my multi-million-dollar vessel, and I am holding you entirely liable for any damages to the property." Captain Rossi looked down at the heavy gold diving watch strapped to his thick wrist. "You have exactly 10 minutes to collect whatever personal items you brought on board and vacate the premises," he announced loudly, addressing the entire room. "If you are not off my deck and standing on the public dock in exactly 10 minutes, my security team will physically throw you off this boat, and I will personally have the harbor police arrest every single one of you for defrauding a maritime business. The clock starts right now." Maya let out another weak, agonizing wail, but one of the tactical security officers simply stepped forward and glared down at her, demanding she get up off the floor. Reginald remained completely unresponsive, his eyes staring blankly at the wall. 2 of the heavily armed guards stepped toward his leather armchair, grabbing him firmly by the shoulders and roughly hauling him to his feet. They practically had to drag his dead weight toward the exit, his expensive Italian leather shoes scuffing against the polished wood. The immediate threat of being physically dragged off a luxury yacht by armed security guards finally triggered a frantic, pathetic survival instinct inside Vivienne. She snapped out of her frozen state of horror and scrambled across the floor, dropping to her knees beside her matching set of supposedly exclusive designer luggage. I stood near the customized bar, watching with a cold, clinical fascination as my mother began frantically shoving her belongings into her bags. She was moving with such manic, desperate urgency that she completely forgot her high society poise. She grabbed a handful of silk scarves and expensive cosmetics, jamming them carelessly into her supposedly limited edition Birkin bag. She grabbed the heavy gold zipper and pulled it shut with a violent, panicked yank. The cheap metal zipper immediately snapped right off in her hand, falling onto the floor with a hollow clatter. The sudden force caused the synthetic leather handle to tear completely away from the base of the bag, revealing cheap cardboard lining and toxic-smelling industrial glue underneath. It was a perfect physical representation of her entire existence. For years, Vivian had paraded around the country club looking down her nose at everyone else. She had constantly criticized my modest but authentic clothing while she carried high-end counterfeit bags and wore incredibly convincing fake jewelry. She did it because Reginald was secretly drowning in massive debt just trying to maintain their wealthy facade. She had spent my entire childhood projecting an image of untouchable aristocratic elegance when in reality her life was nothing but a cheap plastic imitation held together by lies and stolen money. Now the seams were literally tearing apart in her hands. Maya was completely useless. She was still sitting on the floor crying over her shattered laptop, entirely incapable of packing a single item. Vivian slapped her daughter on the shoulder, demanding she get up and help, but Maya just curled tighter into a ball, burying her face in her arms. The 10-minute countdown was ticking away rapidly. The security guards began marching through the cabin, actively herding them toward the rear deck. Vivian zipped up her remaining intact luggage, her chest heaving heavily with exhaustion. She looked wildly around the cabin, her panicked eyes finally locking onto me. The absolute reality of her zero balance finally crashed down upon her. Their bank accounts were frozen by the federal government. The country club had permanently banned them from the premises. The Georgetown estate was heavily leveraged and likely already surrounded by federal agents waiting to seize the property. They had literally nowhere to go and absolutely no money to get there. Oh. Vivian let go of her cheap, broken luggage and slowly walked toward me. The arrogant, tyrannical matriarch who had spent the last 2 decades treating me like an unwanted infection had completely vanished. She stopped a few feet away from me, her hands clasped together tightly against her chest in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Rachel," she whimpered, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Rachel, please, you have to help us. We have absolutely nothing left. You are a billionaire now. You have that massive luxury penthouse in the financial district. Please, just let us stay with you for a few nights until we can figure this out and contact our lawyers. We are your family, Rachel. I am your mother. You cannot just leave us out here on the dock in the middle of the night. Please have some compassion for your own flesh and blood." I stared at the woman who had spent my entire life making sure I felt entirely worthless. I looked at the dark mascara tears streaming down her face and the desperate, terrified pleading in her eyes. I searched myself for any lingering trace of familial loyalty or pity. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger, no sadness, and certainly no compassion. I smoothly turned around and walked out through the shattered glass doors, stepping onto the warm, humid rear deck of the yacht. Waiting idle in the dark water right alongside the massive vessel was my private, sleek mahogany speedboat. The captain was standing at the helm, the powerful twin engines humming with a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the wooden deck. I stepped up onto the polished railing of the yacht, looking back over my shoulder into the brightly lit cabin. The security guards were actively shoving Vivian and Maya toward the exit, their broken, cheap luggage dragging loudly across the floor behind them. I met my mother's desperate, pleading eyes one final time. "Sorry, Mom," I said, my voice carrying perfectly clear over the sound of the idling boat engines. "My building's HOA has a strict policy against letting felons pass the lobby." I gracefully stepped off the yacht and down onto the plush white leather seating of my private speedboat. I gave the captain a single crisp nod. He immediately pushed the throttle forward, and the powerful boat surged away from the massive yacht, slicing cleanly through the dark harbor waters. I did not look back. I simply sat back against the leather cushions, letting the cool ocean air wash over my face, leaving them completely stranded, surrounded by armed security, and permanently trapped in the exact prison they had built for themselves. The heavy boots of the maritime security guards thudded loudly against the metal gangway as they forcefully herded the remaining members of the Wellington family off the luxury yacht. The guards did not offer umbrellas or a moment of sympathy. They simply formed a rigid wall of dark tactical gear, pushing Reginald, Vivian, Maya, and Preston down onto the cold, hard concrete of the public marina. The moment their ruined designer shoes hit the dock, the sky above the harbor completely tore open. The oppressive humidity broke, giving way to a violent torrential downpour. Heavy freezing sheets of rain began to violently assault the docks, instantly soaking through their expensive tailored clothing and plastering their hair to their faces. Vivienne dropped to her knees on the wet concrete, frantically trying to gather her spilled cosmetics and silk scarves from the broken cheap luggage. The freezing rain immediately began to dissolve the cheap cardboard lining of her counterfeit designer bags, turning the fake leather into a soggy, miserable mess. The glamorous high society facade she had maintained for over 30 years was literally melting away into the dirty harbor puddles right in front of her eyes. Reginald stood in the pouring rain, his massive frame shivering under his soaked suit jacket. He looked down at his wife kneeling in the dirty puddles clutching her ruined fake bags, and something inside his tightly wound psychological dam completely snapped. The polished, intimidating defense attorney completely vanished, replaced by a cornered, desperate animal. "Look at what you have done, Vivian!" Reginald roared, his booming voice easily cutting through the sound of the crashing rain. "Look at this pathetic, miserable mess. This is entirely your fault." Vivienne froze her hands, hovering over a ruined silk scarf. She slowly looked up at her husband, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black rivers. "My fault," she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical shrill. "How dare you blame me for this, Reginald? You are the one who is facing a federal indictment. You are the one who let the authorities raid your firm. I did it for you." Reginald screamed, stepping forward and kicking one of her ruined bags, sending cheap plastic makeup compacts scattering across the wet concrete. "I spent 3 decades suffocating under the weight of your bottomless, insatiable greed. You had to have the Beacon Hill mansion. You had to have the platinum membership at the Black Elite Country Club. You had to host those lavish, ridiculous charity galas just to prove to a bunch of arrogant snobs that you were better than them. My firm was not bringing in enough legitimate money to cover your psychotic spending habits, so I had to find other ways. I lied, and I embezzled, and I buried massive debts, solely to maintain the pathetic fake aristocratic pedigree you were so desperately obsessed with projecting. You ruined me, Vivian. You drove me to become a criminal just so you could wear fake pearls and pretend you were royalty." Vivian scrambled backward on the wet dock, completely, utterly outraged by his vicious attack. She refused to accept a single ounce of the blame. Her eyes darted around wildly, searching for a new target to absorb her explosive panic. She locked her furious gaze onto her favorite child, who was currently shivering against a wooden piling. "Do not you dare blame my social ambitions, Reginald," Vivian spat, crawling to her feet, her ruined silk blouse clinging to her skin. "If you want to blame someone for this absolute catastrophe, look at your precious golden daughter." Maya flinched violently, pressing her back against the wet wood. "Mom, no." Maya whimpered, crossing her arms over her chest, as if to physically protect herself from the incoming verbal assault. "I sacrificed everything for you, Maya." Vivian screamed, marching toward her daughter through the freezing rain. "I poured every single ounce of our remaining capital into grooming you for absolute greatness. I paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for the finest finishing schools, the elite etiquette coaches, the exclusive wardrobe, and even your expensive plastic surgery. I explicitly engineered your entire existence for one single highly specific purpose. You were supposed to marry generational wealth. You were supposed to secure a billionaire who could quietly pay off our massive debts and elevate our family to the absolute highest tier of society." Vivian stopped inches from Maya's face, pointing an accusatory shaking finger directly between her eyes. "And what did you do, Maya?" Vivian yelled, the rain washing the dark makeup down her furious face. You threw all of my investments completely away. You were too stupid and too hopelessly lazy to put in the actual work required to land a genuine high society heir. Instead, you took the absolute easiest path available. You let yourself be completely charmed by a flashy, arrogant grifter who bought you a few expensive dinners and promised you a fake castle. You married a criminal Maya. You linked our family to a cheap con artist because you have zero actual substance and absolutely no common sense. You brought the federal investigators right to our front door. Maya let out a guttural, agonizing wail of pure despair. The golden child illusion was entirely broken. Her own mother had just reduced her entire existence to a failed financial transaction. Maya spun around, her tear-filled eyes locking onto her husband. Preston was standing a few feet away, desperately checking his waterlogged phone, completely ignoring the absolute destruction happening around him. Maya lunged forward, her manicured hands curling into tight fists. She slammed her hands directly into Preston's chest, hitting his wetsuit jacket with everything she had. "You lied to me!" Maya screamed, her voice tearing her throat as she continued to hit him. "You promised me the entire world, Preston. You told me you were making millions of dollars on Wall Street. You told me we were untouchable. I cut off my own sister for you. I actively participated in your disgusting lies, and I stood by you while you humiliated my family, and you gave me a piece of cut glass. You pawned my grandmother's heirloom and let me parade around high society wearing absolute garbage. You used me to hide your crimes." Preston stumbled backward, swatting Maya's hands away with a look of pure, unfiltered disgust. He did not look apologetic. He did not look remorseful. He looked entirely annoyed that she was interrupting his attempt to secure an escape route. "Grow up, Maya," Preston snapped, wiping the freezing rain from his eyes. "You love the money just as much as I did. You never asked a single question about where the funds were coming from as long as your designer closet stayed full. We are all sinking, and I am not going down with a family of bankrupt, pathetic losers." Suddenly, a pair of bright yellow headlights cut through the dark sheets of freezing rain. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the edge of the public dock, the glowing Uber beacon illuminating the wet pavement. Preston had secretly ordered the ride while Reginald and Vivian were screaming at each other. Maya gasped in relief, seeing the warm, dry interior of the car. She immediately lunged toward the rear passenger door, her hand wrapping around the silver handle. "Preston, we have to get out of here!" Maya cried, her voice shaking with cold and absolute desperation. "We have to go to a hotel. We need to hide." Preston stepped up right behind her. He did not open the door for his wife. He did not offer her his jacket. He simply placed his large hand flat against the center of Maya's back and shoved her with brutal, unhesitating force. Maya let out a sharp shriek of surprise as her designer heels completely lost traction on the wet concrete. She flew backward, her arms flailing wildly in the air before she crashed down hard into a deep, filthy puddle of freezing mud and motor oil. The dirty brown water splashed up completely, covering her face and ruining the last remaining shreds of her expensive gown. Preston did not even blink. He smoothly grabbed his leather duffel bag from the dock and tossed it onto the plush back seat of the waiting car. "I am looking out for myself now, Maya," Preston stated, his voice utterly devoid of any human empathy. "Your mother is right. You are a terrible investment." Preston slid into the dry, warm interior of the black sedan and slammed the heavy door shut. He barked a sharp command to the driver. The car's engine revved loudly and the tires spun on the wet asphalt, kicking up a thick spray of dirty harbor water right into Vivian and Reginald's faces. The sedan sped away into the dark, stormy night, abandoning the three of them completely. Maya sat in the freezing mud, weeping uncontrollably. Vivian stood shivering uncontrollably, clutching her broken plastic luggage. Reginald remained completely motionless, staring out into the dark, empty harbor. They were utterly stranded on the cold concrete curb, with no money, no shelter, and absolutely no one left to exploit. Exactly 1 month had passed since that stormy night on the public marina. The dark, freezing rain and the bitter screaming had entirely faded into the past, replaced by the warm, brilliant glow of absolute success. I stood in the center of the grand lobby of the newly renovated historic building in the heart of the financial district. Tonight was the official red carpet grand opening of my new philanthropic organization. The Vanguard Foundation was explicitly aimed at supporting and funding minority women entrepreneurs. It was a massive, beautiful initiative designed to provide millions of dollars in grants to brilliant women who had been overlooked and undervalued by the traditional corporate world. The atmosphere in the grand lobby was absolutely electric. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over the pristine white marble floors. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated through the massive room, carrying silver trays of expensive champagne and delicate appetizers. Soft classical music floated through the air, blending perfectly with the sophisticated hum of conversation. I wore a stunning custom-tailored emerald silk gown that swept gracefully across the polished marble. I felt incredibly powerful, serene, and entirely in control of my own destiny. The guest list for the evening was nothing short of spectacular. I had invited the absolute elite of global high society. The room was filled with billionaire investors, prominent politicians, influential media moguls, and international business leaders. These were the exact same powerful aristocrats that Reginald and Vivian had spent their entire lives desperately trying to impress. My parents had sacrificed their dignity and committed massive federal crimes just to secure a fleeting invitation to the same social circles that were now actively celebrating my personal triumph. I watched the elite guests mingle, knowing they were here to support my vision and my wealth, completely forgetting that the Wellington family ever existed. Suddenly, a loud, harsh commotion erupted near the towering glass front doors. The polite, sophisticated chatter in the grand lobby immediately died down as the heavy velvet ropes were violently shoved aside. Two massive private security guards stepped forward, reaching for their radios to intercept the disturbance. I turned my head toward the entrance and immediately raised a single hand, signaling the guards to stand down. Stumbling through the pristine glass doors, bringing the foul smell of the street into my beautiful foundation, were the three people I never thought I would see again. Reginald, Vivian, and Maya stood trembling in the center of the magnificent lobby. They looked completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, untouchable aura they had projected for decades was entirely gone. Reginald looked as though he had aged 20 years in a single month. His broad, intimidating shoulders were slumped forward in defeat. He was wearing an ill-fitting, wrinkled gray jacket that looked like it had been pulled from a donation bin. His face was covered in a patchy gray beard, and his eyes were bloodshot and sunken deep into his skull. Vivian looked even worse. The flawless, aristocratic matriarch was completely stripped away. Her hair was a frizzy, tangled mess with stark white roots showing through the fading blonde dye. She wore a cheap, stained polyester blouse, and her hands shook violently at her sides. Maya stood slightly behind them, looking gaunt and absolutely terrified. Her expensive designer facade had been completely washed away, leaving a hollow, desperate shell of a woman. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of high society guests. The elite billionaires and socialites immediately recognized the disgraced Wellington family. They began whispering rapidly to one another, pointing their champagne flutes, and watching the spectacle with morbid fascination. Vivian took a shaky step forward, her eyes frantically scanning the opulent room before locking directly onto me. She let out a loud, dramatic sob and stumbled across the white marble floor. She threw herself entirely on my mercy, dropping directly to her knees right in front of my emerald gown. "Rachel, please!" Vivian wailed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and silencing the entire room. "You have to help us, Rachel. We have absolutely nowhere else to go." I stared down at the woman who had tormented me for my entire childhood, feeling nothing but cold, clinical observation. She reached out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the expensive silk fabric of my dress. I took a single, deliberate step backward, leaving her grasping at empty air. "What are you doing here, Vivian?" I asked, my voice perfectly level and projecting clearly across the silent lobby. "This is a private event." "We have nothing left." Reginald croaked, his legendary booming voice reduced to a pathetic, gravelly rasp. He shuffled forward, completely ignoring the staring eyes of the wealthy guests. The federal government seized everything, Rachel. They froze every single bank account and liquidated the estate. My law firm is gone. Our defense attorneys completely abandoned us because we could not pay their massive retainers. We are facing decades in federal prison and we do not even have enough cash to buy food. We have been sleeping in a disgusting roadside motel for 3 weeks. Maya stepped forward, tears streaming down her pale face. Preston served me with divorce papers. She sobbed, her voice cracking with pure misery. He took whatever hidden cash he had stashed away and completely vanished. He left me to face all the angry creditors and the federal investigators completely alone. I have absolutely nothing, Rachel. I am starving. Vivian let out another theatrical wail, pressing her face toward the cold marble floor. We are your blood, Rachel. She cried, attempting to play the ultimate emotional card one last time. We are your family. You cannot just turn your back on us when we are suffering like this. I know we made mistakes, but you have to forgive us. You are a billionaire now. You have the power to save us. Please, Rachel, we are begging you for a job. We will do absolutely anything for a paycheck to afford a basic lawyer. You have to give us a chance to survive. I stood perfectly still, letting her pathetic, fake tears soak into the pristine floor. The utter hypocrisy of her words was staggering. For decades, they had treated me like a repulsive burden. They had actively tried to steal my inheritance and destroy my corporate reputation. Now that their fraudulent empire had completely collapsed and they were staring down the barrel of federal prison, they suddenly remembered the concept of family. They were not sorry for a single thing they had done to me. They were only sorry that they had been caught and stripped of their unearned wealth. I looked around the grand lobby, making eye contact with several prominent billionaires who were watching the confrontation with intense curiosity. I slowly turned my gaze back down to the 3 broken figures groveling at my feet. You want a job? I stated, my voice cutting through the thick silence of the room. You want a paycheck to fund your legal defense? Yes, Reginald begged, clasping his shaking hands together. Anything, Rachel. We will take any position you have available in your corporate office. We just need an income. We just need a second chance. I let a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I nodded my head, acknowledging his desperate plea. I actually believe in the value of hard, honest work. I said, my tone completely devoid of any pity. And you are incredibly lucky tonight, Reginald. I do happen to have immediate openings available right now. I raised my hand and gestured toward my executive assistant, who was standing quietly near the grand staircase. She immediately stepped forward, holding 3 heavy folded garments in her arms. She walked over and dropped the garments directly onto the white marble floor, right next to Vivian's trembling knees. They were 3 thick industrial gray janitorial jumpsuits. The overnight cleaning staff unfortunately called in sick this evening, I announced, gesturing down at the heavy gray fabric. I need this pristine marble floor kept absolutely spotless for my guests. I need the public restrooms scrubbed, sanitized, and restocked throughout the entire gala. If you want a paycheck from my foundation, you are going to earn it by doing actual manual labor. Vivian stared down at the gray jumpsuits, her jaw dropping open in absolute horror. The realization of what I was demanding hit her like a physical blow. You want us to clean toilets? Maya whispered, stepping back in complete shock. You want us to scrub floors in front of all these people? I looked around the room, gesturing broadly to the crowd of elite politicians and powerful socialites. These are the exact same people you spent your entire life desperately trying to impress, Maya. I stated, my voice dripping with icy satisfaction. These are the billionaires you worshipped and the high society aristocrats you thought you belonged with. So yes, if you want my money, you are going to put on those gray jumpsuits right now. You are going to grab a mop and a bucket, and you are going to scrub the dirt off the floors while the absolute elite of global society watch you do it. Reginald's face turned a deep shade of purple, his pride violently clashing with his desperate need for survival. He looked at the heavy gray uniform on the floor, and then looked up at the whispering, staring crowd of wealthy guests who were actively pointing and laughing at his ultimate degradation. You are going to humiliate us. Vivian gasped, tears of actual, genuine horror filling her eyes. You want to parade us around like peasants. You humiliated yourselves, Vivian, I replied coldly, turning my back on them to rejoin my guests. I am simply offering you the only honest job you are actually qualified for. You have exactly 2 minutes to put on the uniforms and grab a mop, or my security team will throw you back out onto the street to starve. The choice is entirely yours. I walked away gracefully, leaving them kneeling in the center of the grand lobby, completely trapped between their crushing aristocratic pride and their desperate, pathetic need to survive. The transformation took less than 20 minutes. When my parents and sister finally emerged from the employee locker room, they were completely stripped of their lifelong aristocratic illusions. The heavy industrial gray canvas of the janitorial jumpsuits hung loosely on their frames. Vivian clutched a bright yellow plastic mop bucket, her knuckles white and shaking. Reginald pushed a heavy commercial trash cart, his head bowed so low his chin rested against his chest. Maya trailed behind them, holding a bundle of coarse microfiber rags. They shuffled into the grand lobby looking like the ghosts of their former selves. I watched them blend into the background of my magnificent red carpet gala. The elite guests barely noticed them at first, simply stepping around the cleaning crew as they navigated the pristine white marble floor. But every so often, a wealthy socialite or a powerful chief executive would glance down, and a look of absolute shock would spread across their face as they recognized the disgraced Wellington family scrubbing shoe scuffs off the tiles. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. The humiliation radiating from my family was palpable. But Maya had never learned how to accept defeat. Even wearing a rough gray jumpsuit and holding dirty rags, her toxic entitlement boiled over into a desperate need for revenge. I was standing near the center ice sculpture, engaged in a deep conversation with one of the most prominent venture capitalists in the country. He was the primary backer for my new philanthropic foundation, and his presence tonight guaranteed millions of dollars in future grants for minority women entrepreneurs. Maya saw us talking. She saw the absolute respect and admiration in the investor's eyes when he looked at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, bitter hatred. She could not stand the fact that I had won. She decided that if she was going down, she was going to drag my entire foundation down with her. I saw her moving through the crowd out of the corner of my eye. She intercepted a passing waiter who was carrying a silver tray loaded with glasses of deep red vintage wine. Maya snatched the tray from the waiter's hands before he could even protest. She marched directly toward us, her eyes locked onto the back of the major investor's pristine white tuxedo jacket. With a vicious snarl, Maya deliberately swung the heavy silver tray forward, hurling a massive wave of dark crimson wine directly onto the investor. The expensive glass shattered against the marble floor with a deafening crash. The dark red wine splattered across the investor's jacket, completely ruining the expensive fabric. Gasps of horror erupted from the surrounding guests. The music abruptly stopped. Maya dropped the silver tray onto the floor with a loud metallic clatter. She stood there, crossing her arms over her gray jumpsuit, a malicious, victorious smirk spreading across her face. She looked directly at me, waiting for my ultimate downfall. She fully expected the powerful investor to completely lose his temper, demand that I fire my incompetent staff, and publicly withdraw his massive financial support from my foundation. She thought she had just orchestrated my absolute ruin on the most important night of my life. The investor let out a loud, furious gasp. He slowly turned around, his face red with anger as he looked down at his ruined white tuxedo. But as his angry eyes locked onto the woman standing in front of him, his expression completely changed. The fury vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound, absolute disbelief. Maya's triumphant smirk completely froze. The color instantly drained from her face as she looked up at the man she had just assaulted. It was Arthur Sterling. He was the ruthless, cutthroat billionaire who ran the elite Wall Street investment firm where Preston had formerly worked. He was the man Preston had stolen millions of dollars from to buy Maya's fake castle. Arthur had personally initiated the federal investigation that had completely destroyed the Wellington family. Arthur stared at Maya, taking in her frizzy hair, her ruined complexion, and the oversized gray janitor uniform she was wearing. He looked down at the mop bucket sitting a few feet away. He realized exactly what he was looking at. The arrogant, entitled wife of the criminal who had tried to defraud his firm was now scrubbing floors for a living. Arthur Sterling threw his head back and let out a booming, echoing laugh. The deep, wealthy sound of his amusement rolled across the silent lobby, completely shattering Maya's last remaining shred of dignity. "Well, I will be damned," Arthur announced, his booming voice projecting clearly to every single billionaire and socialite in the room. He pointed a large finger directly at Maya's face. "The Wellington girl, you are actually scrubbing floors. I heard the federal government seized your entire pathetic estate, but I never imagined I would see you pushing a mop at a charity gala. Preston really left you in the absolute gutter, did not he?" The entire room erupted into laughter. The elite guests who had once attended Maya's lavish parties now openly mocked her. They pointed their champagne flutes and whispered cruel jokes about her gray jumpsuit and her spectacular fall from grace. Maya stood completely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing silently. The sabotage had entirely backfired. She had not ruined my foundation. She had only drawn a massive spotlight onto her own pathetic, humiliating reality. Vivian and Reginald stood frozen near the coat check, utterly paralyzed by the sound of the entire high society world laughing at their daughter. They could not even summon the courage to step forward and defend her. They simply lowered their heads, accepting their permanent place at the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy. I stepped forward, my emerald silk gown gliding smoothly over the marble floor. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I simply looked at the three broken, miserable people who had once made my life a living nightmare. I raised my right hand and caught the eye of my head of security. "Escort the cleaning staff out through the service door." I commanded, my voice carrying a quiet, absolute authority. "They are no longer required tonight." 4 massive security guards immediately stepped out of the shadows. They grabbed Maya by the arms of her gray jumpsuit, dragging her away from Arthur Sterling. She did not fight back. She simply hung her head and began to weep quietly. The guards marched over to Vivian and Reginald, pushing them toward the hidden back hallways of the building. The great Wellington family was paraded through the swinging kitchen doors past the dumpsters and the service elevators, completely banished from the glittering world they had sacrificed their souls to belong to. The grand lobby doors remained closed, keeping the cold, harsh reality of the city streets outside. The string quartet began playing a lively, elegant melody. The waiters seamlessly cleaned up the spilled wine, and the elite guests returned to their joyful, sophisticated conversations. My grand opening was a spectacular, flawless success. I walked over to the private bar and accepted a fresh crystal glass of an incredibly rare $5,000 vintage wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich, complex flavors wash over my palate. A timid voice spoke up from behind my shoulder. It was my cousin Sydney. She was wearing a plain black blazer, holding a digital tablet tightly against her chest. When the Wellington Empire collapsed, Sydney had come begging for a job just to survive. I had hired her as a low-level administrative assistant simply because she knew how to organize a schedule. "Rachel," Sydney whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she looked toward the swinging service doors where our relatives had just been dragged away. "Do you ever feel bad for them? I mean, they are practically living on the street now." I turned to look at Sydney. I took another slow sip of my expensive wine, feeling the absolute total peace that had settled permanently into my soul. I thought about the 17 years I had spent locked in an attic wearing threadbare clothes while they feasted on stolen money. I thought about the quiet, dark nights when I had promised myself I would one day reclaim my own life. I smiled gently, looking out over the magnificent room filled with brilliant, successful women who were finally getting the funding and respect they deserved. "No, Sydney," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely resolute. "This table is for my real family, and they lost their seats a long time ago." I turned back to the glittering crowd, taking my rightful place among the elite. Far away in the service alley, the heavy oak delivery doors slammed shut, echoing with a final resonant thud, leaving Reginald, Vivian, and Maya out in the cold forever.